Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Last month, we covered a lot of new cards coming out of Dimension Force, including the outrageous updates to the Albaz storyline, but we still have one more archetype from the pack that needs covering before we can move on to new developments. Odd Eyes has been a... Oh boy, no. No, we're not going to be covering that for a while. Patron goal. Today, we'll be covering the Swift and Savage Scareclaws, who are shaping up to usurp Crusadia and Mathmech as the premier Extra Monster Zone OTK Kingpin. For these feral fighters, actions speak louder than words, so let's bring to heel our animal companions, review our pack tactics for maximum dismemberment, and see who we can rope into our Carnival of Carnage. Hone your claws and practice your howls, because it's time to unleash the beast with Scareclaw. So what's the deal with Scareclaws? Well, we actually have a few different classifications for them. We have a group of level 3 Earth Beasts that act as material and support, a pair of Warrior Monsters who are also kinda support, and a big Link 3 that's the cornerstone of the entire strategy that everything revolves around. In fact, let's reverse our usual order and start by going over the deck's big boss monster, so we'll have context for the rest of the cards we'll be going over. Scareclaw Tricheart is a Link 3 Dark Beast Warrior monster with 3000 attack, requiring 3 effect monsters as material, and must be linked summoned. While on the field, all face-up monsters on the field are changed to defense position, kinda like a defense position Bagooska. But instead of negating the activated effects of defense position monsters, Tricheart is unaffected by activated effects of defense position monsters. And once per turn, if this card is in your extra monster zone, you can target a level 3 Scareclaw monster in your grave and special summon it, and if you do, add a Scareclaw monster from your deck to your hand. But you won't be able to special summon monsters for the rest of the turn except Scareclaws. Now, on its own, this card is already an absolute terror. Aside from Link monsters, Tricheart does an excellent job of pinning on-field monsters, rendering negation and interaction with them pointless. And the best part is, aside from their Scareclaw summoning effect, they're a generically strong monster, if a bit cost intensive. They're also like a humongous Cerberus Centaur with a giant Buster Sword with a galaxy inside them. How cool is that? Alright, now let's talk about those support monsters. As stated previously, they're all level 3 Earth Beast monsters, but they can also special summon themselves from your hand to your main monster zone in the same column as a Scareclaw monster you control, or in a zone adjacent to one you control, but you can only special summon each of them once per turn like that. Scareclaw Akroa has 0 attack and 2000 defense, and while on the field, your Scareclaw monsters in the extra monster zone gain 300 attack for each defense position monster you control. A small boost on its own, but added to a base 3000 attack monster, it gets pretty ferocious, especially because of Tricheart's own revival effect. If you summon or search Akroa with it, that's 600 attack right there, and it doesn't just count your defense position monsters, so the more non-links your opponent has, the stronger Trick will get. They're basically the physical manifestation of the phrase, the best offense is a good defense. Scareclaw Astra has 0 attack and 1300 defense, and while on the field, while you control a defense position Scareclaw monster, your Scareclaws in the extra monster zone can attack a number of times each battle phase, up to the number of defense position Scareclaw monsters you control with different names. And for some reason, they forgot to slap on monsters to that multi-attack, so your giant Link can attack directly multiple times, because why not? Heck, even if it can't attack directly, you can get up to 4 attacks with an optimal board, so only the most stalwart of lineups will have anything left after Trick's onslaught. But I'm starting to think we have some animal cruelty issues going on here. I don't think those energy balls are at all humane. Scareclaw Veronia has 0 attack and 1700 defense, and gives your Scareclaw monsters in the extra monster zone the ability to deal piercing battle damage. So on top of everything else, the multi-attacks, the attack boost, the forced defensification, you can also just pull an Arc V. It's outrageous. And the best part is, despite having 0 attack, it's not like they're going to be battling anyway. Trick keeps them all on too much of a tight leash to worry about that. This is a great monster to round out our level 3s, turning Tricheart from a terror to an absolute juggernaut on the battlefield. Just be careful you don't have a fear of needles before committing to this deck, because these ones look sharp. Alright, time to talk about our warriors. Scareclaw Reichhardt is a level 4 dark monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense, and they have the same special summon effect as our beast Scareclaws. And if normal or special summoned, you can add a Scareclaw Speller Trap from your deck to your hand, then if there are 3 or more defense position monsters on the field, you draw a card. That sounds suspiciously like Sky Striker Mobilize Engage, but thankfully, this card has a hard once per turn clause. Or should I say, Scareclaws. Huh? Anyways, yeah, this is just another really solid monster to help make Trick Heart, and you won't have to feel bad about using them as material because they don't have a persistent effect. In fact, since it has an on-summon effect, it's the perfect card to search out with the second half of Trick Heart's revival effect. Heck, especially with the Lynx effect, because while they're out, getting that extra draw is gonna be a breeze. I'm telling you, this monster really is making a good case for Catboy supremacy. The next warrior technically isn't a Scareclaw, but gets mentioned in pretty much all the Scareclaw spells and traps we're about to go over. Vsauce equals Starfrost is a level 6 light tuner monster with 2100 attack and 1500 defense, meaning they've got a bit of an Albaz Aluber, who are you, I'm you but hotter thing going on. Opposite attributes and stat lines, but matching types, and they look basically the same, with the color stripes in their hair being in the same place, though a different color, and possessing the same right arm made of star stuff. While in your hand, you can target a face-up monster you control with a different type and attribute from Visas. You destroy it, and if you do, special summon Visas. And when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can make this card gain a persistent attack bonus equal to half the destroyed monster's original attack or defense, whichever is higher. Not relevant to anything Scareclaws want to be doing, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is cropped up sometime in the future, being involved in all kinds of wacky adventures, dipping into different archetypes, kinda like how World Legacy and the Albaz story does. And this all seems to tie into a spell that came out the set before, New Clear World, not to be confused with a much older field spell, Clear World. This normal spell targets a face-up monster you control, and on resolution, destroys it, and if you do, special summons a monster from your deck in defense position with a different original type and attribute whose level is lower than the destroyed monster's level, but negate its effects. Something that's very similar to Visas' effect. And the card art looks exactly like the celestial bodies that swirl around inside the hands of Visas and Raish. It's giving me a lot of alternate reality vibes, and I can't wait to see where this goes, because it seems like it's going to go absolutely nuclear. And speaking of which, it's time to get to the Scareclaw spells and traps. Scareclaw Nova is a normal spell that targets a Scareclaw or Visas equals Starfrost in your grave and special summons it in defense position. And if any number of Scareclaw Link monsters you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish Nova from the grave as well. A great way to get back into the game if you're lacking material, or just need to grab the right Scareclaw from grave to give Trick the effect it needs. Heck, it can even summon Raish to search you a different spell or trap card. Either way, you can't go wrong with it. Trust me, it's got my Nova seal of approval. Lephobia, the wanton and willful world of desire, is the deck's field spell. When activated, you can add a Scareclaw monster or Visas equals Starfrost from your deck to your hand. Monsters your opponent controls lose 100 attack and defense for each defense position monster on the field, and if there are 3 or more defense position monsters on the field, you can target a card on the field and destroy it. So this is kind of like an honorary beast type Scareclaw and is a great complement to a Croa. Where they buff Trick's attack, Lephobia debuffs your opponent. And not only does it provide hand fixing, but free removal as well. But with all the summoning you'll have to do to make this live, it does kind of make you vulnerable to Nibiru. I mean, just look at the artwork. Okay, that's actually probably Visas showing up, but it's certainly foreboding. Scareclaw Alternative is a normal trap that has you tributing 3 Scareclaw monsters as cost, and on resolution, your opponent can only special summon monsters in defense position for the rest of the turn. And during your turn, you can banish this card from your grave to inflict 100 points of damage to your opponent for each defense position monster on the board. Now, at first, this seems really redundant. Trick's already going to be putting monsters in defense position, so if you're going to spend 4 cards total to use Alternative, why not just save a card and get a 3000 attack body by linking into Trick? And the answer is, because defense position is the only way those monsters can be summoned, this effectively turns off Link summoning, the only monster type immune to Trick's effects. So if your opponent's deck primarily involves Link monsters, this makes for a great side deck pick. And hey, getting a little extra burn damage isn't so bad. I mean, it could just as easily not have that grave effect, so it's better than the alternative. Our last card is Scareclaw Splash, a continuous trap that, once per turn, targets a Scareclaw monster or Visas equals Starfrost you control, and this turn, it can attack while in face-up defense position, and if it does, it applies their attack or defense for damage calculation, whichever is higher. So now you can add another attacker to your lineup of defense position Scareclaws, making Trick's multi-attack even more of a threat. And when your opponent activates a card or effect while you control a Scareclaw monster in your extra monster zone, you can send Splash from your face-up spell and trap zone to the grave to negate that effect. So yeah, a searchable Omni-Negate. It doesn't destroy the card, but honestly, in a big beatdown deck like this, we'll take what we can get. Besides, if you destroy the card by effect, it robs you of the opportunity to splash with it on the battlefield. Okay, so that's all the Scareclaw cards, but what do we do with them? Well, we want to set up a big, multi-attacking Link monster and hopefully close the game out that turn. We'll want to go second to take full advantage of our damage output, but if we're forced to go first, you can rest easy knowing your board will be very difficult to interact with, what with all the defense positioning going around, but what we need are enablers and extenders to get us to our game plan lickety-split. So what can we play to help them out? Terraforming and reinforcement of the army are both ways to get Lophobia and Raish respectively, both of which help you grab other cards to make your plays live. And since Trick only needs effect monsters as material, anything that you can summon for free can help here. Jester Confit, for example, is as close to a free summon as you can get, and can be linked into Link Karibo in case you want to use other extenders like Parallel Exceed and World Legacy World Crown. Heck, any of the main deck Crusadias fill the same role, which is part of the reason why people draw the comparison between the two themes. Rescue Cat is a fantastic starter, as it just summons 2 Scareclaws right out of your deck. Their effects are negated, but we'll be using them as link material anyway, so that hardly matters. But since we only need to summon one of them to put a Scareclaw in grave to enable Trick Heart's effect, the second monster you summon can be any eligible one with utility effects. Paracerberus, for instance, sets your grave up with a retaliatory destruction effect should your opponent start thinking about dealing damage to you. I'm looking at you, Long Yuan. Kit can get the Tri-Brigade line going if you splash those in, or if you want to play with some synchros, you've got your fair share of tuners to choose from, including Earth attribute ones to make Naturia Beast and Barkion. Of course, taking your opponent's monsters is always an option. Since Trick Heart's material are just 3 effect monsters, cards like Mind Control and Crackdown can use your opponent's monsters like your own. And lest we forget, while Trick Heart's effect does lock you into only Scareclaw summons, any turn you haven't done that means you've got a Link 3 on hand to make an enormous access code talker. Not really an orthodox play, considering you can end the game by battle with this big bitey boy, but sometimes there are some pesky back row that only a giant cybernetic construct with a huge lance can answer. As for a silly tech pick, and I cannot believe I'm recommending this, but I've lost too many games on stream to not bring this up, Ojama Trio. Obviously you don't want to give your opponent free link material if you can help it, but at the very least you can flip this on your opponent's end phase, and now they have 3 defense position monsters on the field, letting you use Lophobia's destruction effect and enable Raish's bonus draw. Not to mention that it gives Trike what are essentially free direct attacks. If you have piercing available, the 300 defense of the tokens will be offset by the 300 points of burn damage they do when destroyed. Combine that with your attack boosters and multi-attacks, and it's curtains for your opponent. And since they're all beasts as well, Ojama Scareclaw isn't the worst deck you could be playing. In fact, it's pretty darn good. You hear that, Ojama stands? Don't say I never did nothing for you. And that's all I have to say about Scareclaw. They've got a mean streak a mile long, calling up various animal companions to make a nigh unstoppable killing machine, and with the right planning and preparation, there's nothing your opponent can throw at you that'll be claws for concern. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. The latest core set in the OCG, Power of the Elements, just dropped, and that means we've got a lot of new archetypes to cover this month, as well as updates to a particular storyline. One that you've all been waiting for an update for. I am, of course, referring to the multi-dimensional escapades of Vsauce Starfrost. Established in the last core set via the Scareclaw archetype, we're now privy to the next world they're visiting, as well as their new alternate reality doppelganger, presumably on a quest to stop their tyrannical alter egos holds over these other worlds, and collecting them as little phone charm chibis along the way. This time around, we're visiting Pelreno, the primal parallel ruined world, to visit the Tearlaments, a theme of shadowy merfolk that are about to take fusion summoning to the next level. So let's wait around in the shallow end of the pool to see what's going on, dive into the deep end to explore the depths of what this theme is capable of, then see if there are any surprise additions milling about. It's time to talk about the tumultuous, troublesome troop, the Tearlaments. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and there's no better way to get there than on our duel runners. Our next stop is 30k, where we'll have Jack Atlas Explained, which includes Resonators, Red Dragon Archfiend, and whatever other cards were used by the Master of Foster. We've also got our Discord, where I personally enjoy our new Samurai Overlord. I'm also on Twitch, where you can join me for viewer duels and progression pools, and don't forget about my Patreon, where you can gain access to my videos early, reach some of these milestones, as well as helping to determine which explained videos I make. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So, what's the deal with Tearlaments? Well, they're a series of dark attribute aqua-type monsters that, if sent to the graveyard by a card effect, and I mean any card effect, you can fusion summon any fusion monster, and I mean any fusion monster, from your extra deck by placing fusion materials mentioned on it from your hand, field, or grave to the bottom of your deck in any order, including this card in your grave. So while you aren't able to miracle fusion any card in the game, you can make quite a few that require generic enough materials to encompass dark attribute aqua-type monsters, and boy howdy do we have some targets for that. But for now, let's talk about the theme proper, starting with Tearlaments Meru, a level 2 monster with 800 attack and 2000 defense, and if this card is normal or special summoned, you can send the top 3 cards of your deck to the grave. I love the smell of normal summon Dante Mill 3 in the morning. While not doing anything themselves, Meru only has to trip one grave effect to make their summon worthwhile, and with proper deck building you'll find the odds of that to be quite high. Heck, even hitting another Tearlament means triggering a fusion summon, which gives you a pretty good vector to hammer away at your opponent. Tearlament's Hoffinus is a level 3 monster with 1600 attack and 1000 defense, and when your opponent activates a monster effect on the field as a quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the grave. This is absolutely an incredible card. While not exactly a powerhouse when going first, it's incredible during almost any other stage of the game, even during your own turn if your opponent has onboard quick effect ready monsters. You can even play during turn 1 when your opponent's on the play, by chaining to any on-field starter, milling 3, and potentially hitting even more gas before you even draw for turn. And bonus, you don't even have to worry about getting run over in the battle phase, cause they won't have one. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see this card seeing play in any grave-reliant deck as a way to throw more cards into the grave even quicker. Heck, I'm already thinking of putting it in PK Fire. It's a level 3 Dark for crying out loud. They know what they were doing. How could I not take a stab at it? Tearlaments Shaylin is a level 4 monster with 1800 attack and 1300 defense, and during your main phase you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, send a monster from your hand to the grave. Then send the top 3 cards of your deck to the grave. So while all of our monsters are adept at triggering the grave effects of our in-deck monsters, Shaylin is here to make sure our in-hand monsters don't miss out on all the fun. Let me bring your attention to the lack of a semicolon here. This means none of this is done as cost, so any card that triggers by being sent to the grave by effect will trigger, including our Tearlaments, though notably this does not trigger on discard effects. Sorry Bigfoot. They also have a great level and battle stats spread, so even if you completely whiff on the milling effect, not likely but it can happen, then you have a relatively strong bruiser that can sort of help you. But like with Scareclaw, Tearlaments have an odd one out that's a mirror copy of Vsauce in this world. Hey Vsauce, GoldenNova here. Did you know that graveyards are actually the banished zone, but in reverse? Tearlaments Rhinoheart is a level 4 water warrior monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense, and if normal or special summoned, you can send a Tearlaments monster from your deck to the grave, except itself. And if this card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. And if you do, send a Tearlaments card from your hand to the grave. So whereas the rest of our monsters' mills can vary wildly in quality, from hitting 3 explosive cards to a complete mess, Rhinoheart is a targeted Foolish Burial effect that guarantees you'll be triggering a fusion summon. And it's an absolutely devastating card to hit off of your mills for your opponent, as you can trade a Tearlaments card in your hand to revive Rhino, and then immediately Foolish another Tearlaments. So like Rhinoheart, they're one of the best cards of the theme, and you'll you want to see them early and often. Now, we've got to take a brief detour here, because now that we have another member of the Starfrost continuum, we can now see the patterns that they're likely to follow. 1, they're all warriors, and the archetype specific ones are level 4, so Reinforcement of the Army is going to continue being a great card. 2, the main deck heart monsters have the reverse stats of Vsauce, sporting 1500 attack and 2100 defense, whereas Mr. Starfrost here has 2100 attack and 1500 defense. Another aspect that I expected to be the same among them was the clear New World style galactic arm that Vsauce and Reichheart share. And while it's hard to see any in this art, there are others that show it present, even if it's not front and center. They also all have the 3 hair highlights in the same place, just with different colors, which is hella cute. I don't know about y'all, but they've definitely stolen my heart. Alright, now it's time to talk about our fusions, the ones that tie everything together. Tearlaments Kit Kalos is a level 5 monster with 2300 attack and 1200 defense, requiring a Tearlaments monster and an Aqua monster as material. If this card is special summoned, you can take a Tearlaments card from your deck and either add it to your hand or send it to the grave, making this a very flexible extender. They can also target a monster you control, then special summon a Tearlaments monster from your hand or grave, and if you do, send the targeted monster to the grave, letting you swap the places of your monsters while triggering your Tearlaments effects, among other things. And if this card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can send the top 5 cards of your deck to the grave. Now, you can only use each of their effects once per turn, so you can't chain multiple Kit Kaloses in the same turn, but this does mean you can dig ridiculously deep to find your best grave cards. And in the future, you can shuffle back Kit Kalos as fusion material to do it all over again later. And because they made them a level 5, it's the perfect target for instant fusion. You still get the Searcher Foolish, then you can swap out Kit Kalos for any of your yarded Tearlaments, and then get the Big Mill. Seems like Kit Kalos is here to finish the job that Norden started in getting rid of instant fusion. It's all a conspiracy by Big Ready Fusion to bury the ramen competition. I'm telling you, it's true, it's all on the internet. The people wouldn't lie on the internet. Tearlaments Kaleido Heart is a level 9 Dark Fiend monster? With 3000 attack and defense, requiring Tearlaments Rhino Heart and any 2 Aqua monsters as material, and cannot be used as fusion material. Glad we dodged the Albaz bullet on that one. If this card is special summoned, or if any number of Aqua monsters are sent to the grave by a card effect while this card is on the field, you can target a card your opponent controls and shuffle it into the deck. And if this card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can special summon it, and if you do, send a Tearlaments card from your deck to the grave. A bit of an improvement over their base form, as it can only send Tearlament monsters. I'm a little sad the first effect targets, but it's kind of the only thing keeping it balanced. Shuffling a card into the deck is a great way to ensure your opponent doesn't see it ever again, and keeps it from triggering any effects it might have had after it leaves the field. And you get to keep doing this basically every turn, as you'll have ways to trigger it on both players' turns. Also, gotta say, great lore touch making the removal line up with how our deck fusion summons. It's kinda like our opponent's cards are getting consumed by our own. And while it lacks protection itself, it's got some strong self-recursion, while also having Kit Kalos on standby to revive it if your opponent outpaces Kaleido's regeneration. We've got an incredibly powerful boss monster here that any deck could be proud of, and for us lore fiends, you can finally get a better look at that galaxy skin creeping in, kinda like with Trickheart. And speaking of fiends, could you explain where that typing is coming from? You're kind of messing with what I thought were some established conventions here. Okay, that's all our monsters, now it's time for the spells and traps, and we're starting off with Pelreno, the Primal Parallel Ruined Okay, that's all our monsters, now it's time for the spells and traps, and we're starting off with Pelreno, the Primal Parallel Ruined Realm, a field spell that adds a Tearlaments monster or Vsauce Starfrost from your deck to your hand when activated. It grants all of your fusion monsters and Tearlaments monsters a 500 attack boost, and if any number of Tearlaments monsters are returned from your field and or grave to the deck and or extra deck, except during the damage step, you can target a card on the field and destroy it. So it seems we have a few more parallels. Each of the themes in this storyline will have a field spell that shows off the world while searching us Vsauce or a member of its respective theme, and gives us some card removal as long as we do what the deck is intending to do. Raphobia required there to be 3 or more defense position monsters on the field, and Pelreno wants us to return our monsters to the deck, presumably by way of their fusion summoning effects. I also like how it's encouraging our usage of generic fusion monsters, since they get roped into the attack boost as well. There's just so much to talk about when it comes to this card. It's certainly got layers. Tearlaments Meta Noise is a normal trap that you can activate if you control a Tearlaments monster or Vsauce Starfrost. It targets a face-up monster your opponent controls and changes it to face-down defense position, then sends a Tearlaments monster from your deck to the grave. And if this card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can target a Tearlaments monster in your grave and add it to your hand. That's right, even our trap cards gain effects when sent to the grave by effect. So not only do our mills have even more good targets, we might also want to run some Foolish Burial goods as well. But back to the topic at hand, being a Book of Moon with the added perk of Foolish Burial is kinda nice. I'd have preferred being able to use the effect faster, like OG Book of Moon, but regardless, flipping a monster face down can be a huge detriment to a deck's play sequences, especially ones that require monsters for synchro, Xyz, and link summons, or if you need to have a specific kind of monster on board. Kinda like ours. So, like the name says, I wouldn't be surprised to see this card making some noise in the meta sometime soon. Tearlaments Salic is a continuous trap that, if you control a Tearlaments monster or Vsauce Starfrost, lets you target an effect monster on the field, negate its effects, then has you sending a monster you control to the grave. And if this card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can add a Tearlaments monster from your deck to your hand. A repeatable source of effect negation ain't bad, and even sending your monsters to the grave can lead to getting even more cards by triggering your effects, though remember, as a continuous trap card, MST does negate. But even at that point, you're still getting a surge from the destruction, so as long as you don't get Cosmic Cycloned, you'll be getting your cards back one way or another. And if that does happen, then yeah, I could understand you getting pretty salty over losing Salic. Our last card is Tearlaments Crime, a counter trap that can be activated in response to a spell card, trap card, or monster effect, so long as you control a Tearlaments monster or Vsauce Starfrost. You negate the activation, shuffle that card into the deck, once again, great theming, then send a monster from your hand to the grave. And if this card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can target one of your banished Tearlaments monsters and add it to your hand. This is probably only going to apply to Rhino if it gets banished by its own effect, but it's nice to have the option to get anyone in the archetype, in case they get like Karma Cutted or something. And it certainly ain't bad to have an Omni-Negate in your back pocket. Sure, you need to have a monster in hand to activate, but like Salic, it's all part of the overall synergies. We also see what appears to be one of the Tearlaments controlling Kaleido Heart, or stabbing them through the, heart, which might explain why they're a fiend type. It also looks like Vsauce didn't just get a chibi companion, but also took Reich's sweet sword. So it's good to see that Vsauce is holding to one of the most important adventurer tenets. You always loot the body. Okay, so that's all the Tearlaments cards, but what do we do with them? Well, the theme actually doesn't have very many power cards on its own. Kaleido Heart is strong, don't get me wrong, but that's about the only strong thing we have. So since we can fusion summon other monsters, we'll need to rely on them as well to help close things out. So we'll be looking for themes we can splash in to help make some waves. So what can we play to help them out? First off, what fusions can we add effectively to our deck? Well, it's hard to ignore Shaddolls here, especially El Shaddol Winda. It's immune to effect destruction from our opponent, and floodgates their special summons, an effect that never stopped being good ever since it was released. And it's pretty easy to make because all the Tearlaments that use this effect are dark. By adding other Shaddolls, you gain the opportunity to trigger their effects as well, which means searching, back row destruction, and drawing. And if you run base Shaddol fusion, which I think you should, you can even tech in El Shaddol Anoyatilis, using Rhino Heart as the water material. It's a very narrow floodgate effect, but it does keep your opponent from ritual summoning in the Drytron matchup, turns off Boot Sector launch, and stops Tri-Brigade Revolt, because the first part is all about summoning monsters from the grave with a trap card's effect. A very funny option is to use Tearlaments in an Egyptian god deck. All of our monsters are already Aquas, and while we have no level 10s, we're probably already running Guardian Slime if we're doing that, so we've got that material covered. Now, you aren't going to be getting its search effect if you mill it, but by fusioning with our Tearlaments, it'll go back into our deck so we can try again later. Despians are really going to love these effects. All of their fusions have a generic dark monster requirement, Tragedy will trigger off of being milled, and if a Loober gets sent to the grave because of it, then you have the revival effect and negation all loaded up for when you get a fusion on board. You can also pair them with Albaz to make Libellion, which can then fusion summon any number of other fusion monsters. And how do we get Albaz in the grave? With branded fusion, of course. I mean, what else are we gonna do in Tearlaments? Synchro Hold that, we would do that. Vsauce exists. What are we gonna do in Tearlaments? Xyz? No, actually, those are really generic. What are we gonna do in Tearlaments? Links, oh, forget it, move on to the next one. Mud Dragon of the Swamp can be an interesting pick if you don't have any other options to summon. Once you add a non-Aqua Dark monster to your grave, say with, Shadalls, your Tearlament fusions can put it onto the board and give your monster some targeted effect protections. Predaplant Dragostapelia and Chimera Fleecia are both pretty sweet includes. For Drago, you can recycle Kit Kalos and get a 2700 attack monster that's got some great monster effect negation. While Chimera Fleecia gives you Banishing Removal, a powerful battle effect that gets over just about anything, and can search you Polymerization or Fusion spell cards. And you don't even have to run any main deck Predaplant monsters to use it. Just and once it's in the grave, you'll have it for later turns. And what can you use with Verte Anaconda? A branded fusion, I just said! So those are the fusion synergies, but what about with Aqua monsters? Well, what if I told you that a theme that has some funny synergy with us is Gradle? See, a monster I haven't really brought up a lot here in this video is Vsauce Starfrost. And while they work very well with our Tearlaments, popping them for its summon is sending it to the grave by a card effect after all, it also triggers Gradle Eagle, which can then steal one of our opponent's monsters. From that point on, we can link it off, or use it as synchro material with Starfrost because for some reason, it's also a tuner. And because the Gradles are Aquas, they can be used as fusion material for our summons. We also can't ignore some of the best Aqua archetypes in the game, Frogs and Paleozoics. Totally Awesome is an outstanding negate, and Paleos provide a lot of interruption. Fun fact, Dinomishus' discard is part of its effect, so it also triggers all of our Tearlament cards. I guess we also can't ignore how useful Dogmatico would be here for us. It's pretty easy to get an extra deck summoned monster onto the board, and with a little comboing, you can have access to Dogmatico Fleur for quick effect negation. Alternatively, you can get Maximus on board to do some extra deck shredding, which leans into the Shadal gameplay by searching a Schism, helps out our game plan by yarding Kit Kalos to get that big 5 mill, and it can even help the weirder strategies by milling a copy of Egyptian God Slime to be used as fusion material for another, as well as the Predaplants, specifically Chimera, for that sweet, sweet value. As for a silly tech pick, well, it is frustrating that, with all the fusion monsters nowadays having generic monster-type materials, that we're stuck with Aqua, one of the least used. Well, we won't be stuck with that for long if we use Rebirth Judgment, the card that looked at Zombie World and thought, hey, what if every type could do that? By making all your graveyard monsters dragons, you could fusion summon Borreload Furious Dragon or Five-Headed Dragon, make them rocks to summon Fossil Warrior Skull King, or spellcasters to summon the mighty Quintet Magician! And that's all I have to say about Tearlaments. They're a compact fusion engine that has quite a bit of room to grow, while their restriction of having to use themselves as fusion material means there's a lot we can't do. I wouldn't be surprised if future releases helped expand our options, perhaps with an ability that's a bit more streamlined than Rebirth Judgment. In fact, I'm sure it'll be so good that it'll leave our opponent in tears. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. With Darkwing Blast recently being released in the OCG, we've got some new archetypes to fawn over, one of which being the latest addition to the Vsauce Starfrost storyline. So far, we've visited a world of fear populated by savage beasts and an ocean of sorrows. And now, it's time for our next step in our interplanetary tour across the world of emotions, the crushing feeling of hopelessness in the face of late-stage capitalism. That's right, instead of Vsauce exploring another realm, the big bads are taking the initiative and bringing the fight to our protagonist. And from what we can see in the art and their effects, Vsauce has their work cut out for them. We've also got some updates to Scareclaw and Tearlaments that help flesh out the current story. So, without further ado, let's catch up with our bullied beasts and morose maidens to see what they're capable of now, explore the capabilities of these cunning colonizers, then see what other worlds they can exploit to bolster their holdings. It's time to captivate with Kashtira. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and there's no better way to get there than on our duel runners. Our next stop is 40k, which means Leo and Luna Explained, where we'll be covering Ancient Fairy Dragon's companions, the Power Tool Dragons, Morphtronics, and any other cards that are more than meets the eye. We've also got our Discord, where we now have even more proof that Phoenix Wright alumni Athena Sykes is Best Girl. I also have a Twitch where you can join me for viewer duels, progression polls pulls, and chaos draft pulls for the foreseeable future. And don't forget about my Patreon, where you can gain access to my videos early, reach some of these milestones, as well as helping to determine which videos I make. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. Oh, actually, really quick, I've got some time codes down below, so if there's any particular archetype you want to get to right now, that's a good way to find them. Alright, let's catch up with Scareclaw, and while we're here, we might as well include all the Power of the Elements releases, since they didn't make their way into the Tearlaments episode. And we've got one little scamp who I'm sure you've all fallen in love with, Scareclaw Explained, a level 1 Dark Beast Warrior Link monster with 500 attack, requiring any Scareclaw monster or Vsauce Starfrost as material. But if you link summon this card, the material must be in the main monster zone, so no folding Triheart into this while in the EMZ, alright? And I guess no using another copy of Lichtheart there either. If this card is link summoned to the extra monster zone, you can add a primitive planet Reichphobia, the theme's field spell, from your deck to your hand. And if you control Vsauce Starfrost, you can special summon this card from your hand, but you can only use that last effect once per duel. The wonderful thing is that it doesn't trigger any kind of special summon lock, so you can use Lichtheart however you wish. But I'm sure what we're most excited for is that it's the link that searches the field spell, 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 the link that searches the field spell. Scareclaw Straddle is a quick play spell that has you activating one of two effects. You can either target a Scareclaw monster or Vsauce Starfrost you control and a face-up monster your opponent controls, and your monster gains attack and defense equal to that monster's original attack or defense, whichever is higher, your choice if tied. Or, when a card or effect is activated that targets any number of your Scareclaw monsters or Vsauce Starfrost you control, you can negate that effect. It's an honest that can turn into targeted effect protection when you need it. The only drawback here is that you can only activate one per turn, cause I'd want to play as many of these as possible. It also looks like we're getting a front row seat to how Vsauce travels between the planes, now being guided by a little chibi companion. Seriously, Konami, plushies, now! Okay, now it's time for some more current support. Decline Scareclaw is a normal spell that targets a primitive planet Reichphobia you control or that's in your grave, and on resolution, return it to your hand. Then, if you control Vsauce Starfrost, you can change a face-up monster your opponent controls to face-down defense position. And if 3 or more defense position monsters are on the field, you can banish this card from your grave to add a Scareclaw card from your grave to your hand. Being able to reuse your field spell is pretty choice, since it can search you more monsters of your theme. And while Book of Moon is a much stronger disruption tool when you can play it at quick effect speed, having it as a bonus effect to turn off a monster, and potentially make it weaker, is still pretty nice. The Grave effect is also neat, getting to recur any of your on-theme cards, but it can only be activated when there's a critical mass of defense position monsters on the field, so you've already kinda got your whole game plan by then, so it's not quite as useful. But if you need a little extra gas to close things out, I certainly wouldn't decline the help. Scareclaw Twin Saw is a normal trap card that tributes a Scareclaw monster to target 2 cards your opponent controls and destroy them. And if you control Vsauce Starfrost, banish them. And if a Link 3 or higher monster is on the field, you can banish this card from your grave, and neither player can activate the effects of Link monsters on the field this turn. Something that'll be really helpful against the new Zealantis, let me tell you. And since it's a trap card, you can spring this at any time. Just make sure you activate this before your opponent performs a Link summon. It stops activations, not effects. So if a Link has an on-summon effect like Nightmares, you won't be able to stop that if you wait until the summon is confirmed. And that's all really great without even touching on the on-field effect. It's basically Sword Soul Blackout, though you have to commit to the tribute as cost, so if it gets negated, you're still stuck holding the bag. But otherwise, it's solid removal that can banish if you've got the leading lad with you, and a little bit of anti-link utility that'll show up right twin time. That wraps up the Scareclaw cards, showing Vsauce's battle against the Kshatriy Law. Now it's time to see it at another angle with Tearlaments, and their new fusion monster, Lulacaris, a level 8 Water Aqua fusion monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense, requiring Tearlaments Chatacaris, one of our previous fusions, and any of our other Tearlaments as material. While on the field, your other Aqua monsters can't be destroyed by battle, forcing your opponent to remove them by effect, which is just fine by me. When your opponent activates a card or effect that includes special summoning any number of monsters as a quick effect, you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Then send a Tearlaments card from your hand or face up on the field to the grave. And if this fusion summoned card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can special summon this card. So you get to use Lulacaris for free for one of your Tearlaments effects, including her own anti-special summoning effect. And the wording here is a very important distinction, as it stops effects that special summon, but not anything like a Link or Synchro summon. And because the battle destruction protection extends to all Aquas, this has some great overlap with frogs. Land a totally awesome on board, whether by frogs or by Bahamut Shark, pair them with this Tearlament, and you won't have a Lulacaris in the world. Tearlaments Grief is a normal spell that can special summon a Tearlaments monster or Vsauce Starfrost from your deck or grave, and if you do, send a monster you control with the same type or attribute to the grave. And if this card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can target one of your banished Tearlament trap cards and add it to your hand, but you can only use one effect per turn and only once per turn. Now, this might not look like it, but this is actually a pretty effective Foolish Burial. After all, it doesn't say you can't send the monster you summoned. Sure, you can summon something and then keep it on the field by sending another monster to the grave, but when all of your Tearlaments trigger when sent to the grave by a card effect, why wait? Well, I guess you'd want to wait until you have a grave with enough material in it to fusion summon, but that's a whole other deal. Alternatively, because it can send any monster with a matching type or attribute, you can send a light, dark, water, aqua, or warrior monster, so if you need to vent another monster from your board and it's one of those 5 parameters, this spell has you covered. And that's a pretty good spread of characteristics if I do say so myself. Good grief. Tearlament Heartbeats is a quick play spell that targets a spell or trap card on the field, or up to 2 instead if you control Vsauce Starfrost, and shuffle them into the deck. Then send a card from your hand to the grave. And if this card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can target a Tearlaments trap card in your grave and add it to your hand, and you can only use one effect per turn, and only once per turn. Damn, shuffle into the deck, that's a great way to get rid of a card. It's only an even trade if you control Vsauce, but since you can send any card from your hand to the grave, you can trigger your Tearlaments spell and trap effects to get some value. And because it's a quick play spell, it can be used as interruption as well. Heck, this just might power creep Cosmic Cyclone given the right deck. You could say it heart beats out the competition. Tearlaments Scream is a continuous spell, and if any number of monsters are normal or special summoned and you control a Tearlaments monster or Vsauce Starfrost, you can send the top 3 cards of your deck to the grave. Also, all face-up monsters your opponent controls lose 500 attack for the rest of the turn. And if this card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can add a Tearlaments trap card from your deck to your hand. This is probably one of our more situational cards, though it can trigger on our own normal and special summons, so it's not entirely without value. Especially because 500 attack can be just what it takes to get over a big monster. Honestly, it has more value as a card you can pitch off your Tearlaments effects to grab an onboard monster negate, an Omni negate, or a Book of Moon type effect. But when it comes to Scream, and I don't care if you shout, I'm gonna let it all out, this is one of the cards I could do without. Come on. And with that, we're all caught up with Scareclaw and Tearlaments. So, with that out of the way, what's the deal with Kshatriy Law? Well, they're a series of level 7 psychic monsters with a variety of attributes, and they can all be special summoned from the hand, provided you control no monsters, have an ignition effect you can use during your main phase to add a certain kind of Kshatriy Law card from your deck to your hand, and a trigger effect you can use when that monster attacks, or when your opponent activates a monster effect. And guess what? That's about to become very lore relevant very soon. But no matter what, it takes some of your opponent's monsters and banishes them face down, so you're going to be stripping away a lot of their resources. As for the name, the Wikipedia article denotes that as a portmanteau of the words Shangri-La, Ira, the Latin word for anger, and Kshatriya, and that is what I find the most interesting, as the Kshatriya are one of the 4 Varna, or social orders, in the Hindu caste system. Something my research has shown has been abolished for decades, but as large institutions made to consolidate power tend to do, have had long-reaching consequences after their removal, even today. The Kshatriya sat at the second highest level of the hierarchy, acting as the warrior caste, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Kshatri Law were working on behalf of another archetype, and in the next set, we'll see their bosses associated with the highest caste, the Brahmins. Let's start by talking about someone we've already had the displeasure of meeting before. Kshatri Law Unicorn, a wind monster with 2500 attack and 2100 defense, and during your main phase, it can add a Kshatri Law spell card from your deck to your hand. And if Unicorn attacks, or when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can look through your opponent's extra deck and banish a card from it face down. Yeah, Dogmaticas have to jump through a million hoops to access your opponent's extra deck, but Unicorn can look at it in response to its search effect being ashed. And that's the real danger of dealing with this theme. Hand traps are the primary way of interacting with your opponent, and many of the best are monsters. That gives the Kshatri Law a kind of true Draco quality, where trying to stop them gets you punished even more. Stopping the Kshatri Law, or even advancing your own game plan, gets you a one-way ticket to a useless extra deck, because they get to surgically extract the best card from it. You know, between this, Nightmare Unicorn, and Cabin in the Woods, I'm starting to think those mythical creatures aren't as pure as we've all been led to believe. Kshatri Law Ogre is a water monster with 2800 attack and 1000 defense. Ooh, Mega Monarch stats. During your main phase, Ogre can search you a Kshatri Law trap card from your deck to your hand, and when this card attacks, or your opponent activates a monster effect, you can excavate the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck, and if you do, banish one of them face down. Also, place the rest of those cards on top of the deck in the same order. So you don't get to mess with your opponent's top deck, but you will get to know what it is, on top of taking away your opponent's best card out of those top 5. Now, outside of just knowing what your opponent's next few top decks are going to be, you don't really have any way to take advantage of that information. But that doesn't mean you can't splash in anything that can. For instance, Spirals just love knowing this stuff, and the two themes don't exactly clash, so it might be worth it to consider adding these spies to your family. Kshatri Law Fenrir is an earth monster with 2400 attack and defense, and during your main phase you can add a Kshatri Law monster from your deck to your hand. And if this card attacks or your opponent activates a monster effect, you can target a face-up card your opponent controls and banish it face down. Now, if the Kshatri Law player is going first, this probably isn't going to deter much, since your opponent's field doesn't, exist. But in most other phases of the game, this can be ruthlessly punishing. It does target, so there is some protection against it, but that's the only protection that will keep them safe. Anything else will get them dumpstered easy. And Fenrir searches you all the rest of your Kshatri Law monsters. This might seem counterintuitive, since they're all level 7 and their special summon effect requires you to control no monsters, but trust me, there's a way around that built right into the theme, so Fenrir here is anything but a lone wolf. The last Kshatri Law monster is currently their only extra deck representative, and despite the stat line, is probably the most frightening. Kshatri Law Shangri-La is a rank 7 Fire Xyz monster with 0 attack and 3000 defense, requiring 2 or more level 7 monsters as material. During the standby phase, you can special summon a Kshatri Law monster from your deck, and it doesn't say your standby phase, the standby phase, so you'll be turboing out these mythic meatheads pretty quickly, though thankfully it is a hard once per turn, so this effect doesn't stack across multiple copies. However, the next one does. Each time any number of your opponent's cards are banished face down, you can choose an unused main monster zone or spell and trap zone, and it can't be used while this monster is on the field. And if this card on the field would be destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can detach a material from it instead. So the more material you put under Shangri-La, the more shields it has to resist destruction. And considering its 3000 defense points, that's no small order. But what's wild is its ability to lock out zones. It isn't once per turn, and while removing Shangri-La gives you back all your zones, it's gotta be by bouncing or shuffling back into the deck. Every other form of removal is gonna be like trying to chew through gristle. And not only can this trigger off of our Kshatriya Law main deck monsters, it also triggers when our opponent banishes cards face down. So if they're running any of the modern Pot of cards, they're gonna have a very important decision to make. They can't just activate it all la-dee-da. Kshatriya Law Birth is a continuous spell that lets you normal summon a level 7 monster without tribute once per turn, which covers all of our on-theme monsters, as well as any other level 7s you'd like to tech in. During your main phase, you can special summon a non-Xyz Kshatriya Law monster that is banished or is in your grave. And if your opponent activates a spell card or effect and you control a Kshatriya Law monster, you can target 3 cards in your opponent's grave and banish them face down. So it's not just our monsters that are filling up the banished pile. Birth is an incredible piece of tech, because on an open board, you can special summon one from your hand for free, normal summon another, then grab one out of your grave, and each one gets you a search effect, provided they're all different Kshatriya Law so their once per turns don't conflict. Then you'll have plenty of attacks to banish even more of your opponent's cards, before folding them into a Shangri-La and solidifying your advantage. This is a truly oppressive card, but considering the aesthetics, I wouldn't expect anything less from the most tyrannical of classes, gamers. Kshatriya Law Prepare is a continuous trap card, and during either player's turn, you can special summon one of your Kshatriya Law monsters that are banished or are in your hand. And if your opponent activates a trap card or effect while this card is already face up in the spell and trap zone, and you control a Kshatriya Law monster, you can look at your opponent's hand and banish one card from it face down. So for anyone who thought they could run Infinite Impermanence as a way to prevent the monsters from punishing you, then you better think again. After all, this is an interplanetary smuggling / mining / overall evil-doing organization. Of course they're gonna come prepared. With all their cards out of the way, normally we'd move on to tech picks, but for this theme, I'd like to take a little extra time to talk about the lore and what's going on here. First, a bit of an addendum. Last time, when talking about Tearlaments, I was under the assumption that Kaleido Heart was under the control of one of the Tearlaments, probably a member of the ruling elite. This somber figure behind Kaleido Heart in their art was my primary reasoning, with the art for Crime possibly showing a stricter form of control. However, I think it's pretty clear now that I was incorrect, as that's not just any old Tearlament, that's Chotakaris, and it looks like they're stabbing Kaleido in the back while Vsauce is drawing aggro. I believe this leads us to the art in Tearlament's Grief, where Kaleido is fading away, and the cosmic wisps of their power are being given to both Vsauce and Chotakaris, which in turn fuels their evolution into Lulakaris. In the art for Tearlament's Heartbeats, we can see Vsauce siphoning even more power from Kaleido, but we see 2 figures descending from above. And those sharp spines don't look like other Tearlaments, those look like Kshatriya Law. But it looks like Peril Reino isn't the place where they'll be duking it out, because Tearlament's Scream shows Unicorn going toe-to-toe against Lulakaris, with 3 comets arcing off in the distance. Now, the last time we saw this was in the art for Peril Reino, but that was only one comet, even though it was Vsauce and Lichtheart. If I had to guess, I'd say that the light blue one is actually Vsauce, lining up with the color of their comet that we've seen them in previously, with the other 2 being the other Kshatriya Law, as Vsauce makes their pursuit. Lulakaris looks to stave off Unicorn, but that's where the art for Kshatriya Law Prepare comes in. See, that canister it's holding shows up a lot in the Kshatriya Law art, but we haven't seen the contents until now. It's very fuzzy at the moment, but considering we're looking at Unicorn, and the person inside looks to have long, wavy hair, I'd bet dollars to donuts that that's Lulakaris, having lost in battle against Unicorn, and is now being hauled back to the Kshatriya Law's birth, which is kind of like a port, for processing. And I wouldn't be surprised if the other canisters were likewise all filled with captives. In the background, we have a figure surrounded in a red aura. I think looks like Vsauce in a way, but like reversed, the armored arm being on the left rather than the right. So I'm thinking this might be a member of the Brahmin class I mentioned earlier in the video, which could mean that Vsauce is a member of their clan, looking to right the wrongs of their civilization. In fact, if I might push the boundaries of speculation here just a bit, the caste below, the Kshatriya, is the Vaishya. And if you smush the syllables together, Vaishya sounds kinda like Vsauce, just enough for it to be a reference without being the actual name. Kind of like how Kshatriya Law is meant to evoke the Kshatriya. but this is where my ignorance is probably having me leaping at shadows based on English translations, and a broad ignorance of actual Hindu culture. If anyone in the audience has more knowledge about Hindu culture, I'd love to hear your thoughts on my conjecture, any information that could clear this up, and even your own theories, because I really dig this stuff. Another quick thing I'd like to point out is how clearly the idea of the Kshatriya law stripping other worlds of resources translates to game mechanics. Each time they banish a card face down, it's always from some place that's kind of a resource. The grave, hand, field, extra deck, nothing is safe from their reaching talons. And it works whether you passively let them attack, or when you resist as a kind of retaliation. Though really, if you retaliate, you at least have some chance of beating them. But if you give up letting them pick apart your cards and even the field you use, then you're doomed to extinction. True, the deck doesn't actually take anything, it just banishes cards face down, but A, if you were able to steal cards on this level, this theme would be even more broken than it already is, and B, I'd even go so far as to say that that's even more flavorful, because it's their actual effects that search Kshatriya Law monsters and revive them that's the actual product. The cards being banished face down, those are the wasted resources after being used up. Even graveyard cards could be used for something, but being banished face down is as poisoned and unusable as it gets. Thankfully, Vsauce is on the scene, ready to deal some damage to the Kshatriya Law, so while they're busy, let's find out what you do with them. And really, I think it's pretty evident that you want to go aggro. You have a lot of cards that punish your opponent, but you also strip them of cards when attacking, so you want to be doing that a lot. All the while, we'll supplement our small monster base with spells and traps that get us our big monsters, utilizing them to clear the way for a swift victory. But what can we play to help them out? Well, both Birth and Prepare summon banished Kshatriya Law, but we don't really have any of our own banishing synergies. While there's no doubt that something like that is coming down the pipeline in later sets, why wait? Let's go ahead and use Sacred Sword of 7 Stars as a draw engine. Once they're banished, we can just summon them right back with our aforementioned back row while grabbing 2 fresh cards. Level 7 is one of the more difficult non-tuners to work with, but the payoff is extraordinary. Considering how easy they are to summon here, the deck is almost begging you to run a full suite of hand traps, because normal summoning Valor gets you level 8 Synchro access, while normal summoning Ash gets you level 10 access. Anybody else looking for a free negate with Barone? Or perhaps a more banishing with Sword Soul Sovereign?
Why not also consider using a hand trap like Heavenly Zephyr Miradora when going second to stop your opponent from being able to use key monsters like their Destroyer Phoenix Enforcers or any important extra deck monsters with over 2,000 attack points, and then during your turn being able to use Kshatriya Law Birth to convert one of your Kshatriya Laws in hand with your Heavenly Zephyr Miradora straight into a Shangri-La to get your plays right off the bat.
Heck, why even waste your normal summon? Punks have been going really strong since their latest wave of support, and with E-Telly, you can grab a little +1 before going into your synchros. Heck, since we want to be special summoning so much, there's no reason not to play the Adventure Engine. Even if you normal summon a Kshatriya Law via Birth's effect, you can just choose not to activate its effects. And in return, you get a negate and a way to clear a card once per turn. We've also got rank 7s to consider. Draco Sack and Big Eye are classics, but we can also invest in Red Eye's Flare Metal Dragon. Masquerade shouldn't be hogging all the fun of taxing effects, right? But a card I feel was made for this deck, if not for the fact that it was released a while ago, was number 89 Diablosis the Mind Hacker. It banishes cards from your opponent's extra deck and grave face down, and can banish mill your opponent's deck face down equal to the number of face down banished cards they already have, which can get really out of hand really quickly. It's almost like a second win condition, a third win condition if you count Shangri-La's Lockout, or as I like to call it, Shangri-Lockout. As for a silly tech pick, how about Piercing the Darkness? Sure, it'll require you to run some high-level normal monsters, and Red Eye's Black Dragon is just the pick. With Birth, we can normal summon them without issue, and if used as Xyz material, or heck even as Synchro material, all the stuff we said before works just as well, and that monster you make benefits from the Honest effect. And if you make Flare Metal Dragon, you can just summon back the Red Eyes so you can do it again. And that's all I've got to say about Kshatriya Law. I expect they'll make a big splash in the competitive scene, as they seem to splash into a lot, can search their relatively small engine very easily, and pack a lot of punishing effects. But if you use them, you are admitting to furthering the agenda of Capital, so you're going right into the morally incorrect Archetypes jail alongside S-Force. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. A heaping helping of Albaz wasn't enough for you, huh? You had to come crawling back to learn about Michael from Vsauce and their adventures with edgy Pokemon, crying mermaids, and mecha capitalists, huh? Well, I guess if anyone is gonna sate your bottomless need for Yu-Gi-Oh! Story mode, it's gonna have to be me. Not like anyone else is handling it. But first, we have to handle some updates. Turns out the Vsauce lore also doesn't have any new archetypes to interact with. In fact, looking at the set list, it looks like Photon Hypernova doesn't have any new archetypes in it at all, which is fine by me. I've been thinking it was about time we focused on updating older themes to bring them up to snuff, rather than continuing to try and reinvent the wheel. And no, Chaos does not count, because I've seen the prog memes. I know how much you all are tired of seeing Chaos. So let's do a quick review of the archetypes so far, cover all the new cards in the Vsauce storyline, then see what new developments for the lore they have in store. It's time to captivate with Kashtira. Again. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy what I do. Once we get to 40k, we're doing our next 5Ds video on Leo and Luna, and every sub helps. Also check out my Discord, where this statement was said, and I'm not gonna say it's intellectually true, but it is emotionally. And my Twitch, where you can watch me put all my lessons to the test live with viewer duels. And if you want to go that extra mile, join my Patreon where you can get my videos early and help us reach these video milestones. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So, quick recap on the theme formerly known as Kshatriya Law. There are a bunch of level 7 psychic monsters that can special summon themselves from the hand if you control no monsters. Each one can search a particular kind of card in the theme, spells for Unicorn, traps for Ogre, and monsters for Fenrir, and that's why it's worth $60 at time of recording. We have some other spells and traps that help summon out our big monsters, all topped off by an Xyz that summons more Kashtira, while being an honorary Ojama, sealing off zones, both monster and spell and trap, whenever your opponent's cards are banished. It's a pretty wild core of effects, but as a pure deck, it doesn't really have the same ceiling as the current Sprite tier format. Or just tier if the exchange of spirit cards have anything to say about it. But that hasn't stopped everyone and their moms from jamming 3 copies of Fenrir into their deck because, let's face it, we all still have a pink or top-shaped hole in our hearts, and unfortunately, Guan Yun just doesn't make the cut. But now we have a whole new wave of Kashtira cards that help flesh out the theme, and their methods of bolstering their ranks are, gruesome to say the least. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's cover Vsauce's new dimensional counterpart, Kashtira Riseheart, a level 4 Fire Warrior monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense, and if you control a Kashtira monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. Also, you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn except Xyz monsters. And during the main phase, if this card was normal or special summoned this turn, you can banish a Kashtira card from your deck, except a copy of itself, to banish the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck face down. And if you do, this card's level becomes 7. Okay, more ways to banish mill your opponent. I wonder when Runic Kashtira will be a thing. Anyway, Riseheart makes it super easy to make Shangri-Ira, or any rank 7 you desire, because it doesn't provide any restriction beyond the Xyz lock. And as it turns out, a lot of our cards trigger when banished, so it's a great way to get those online as well. So all in all, it's a great extender for the theme, and adds to our stable of pretty anime boys. Now if only they knew how to draw different faces, then we'd be in business. We've also got some more level 7s to add to our roster, and it looks like we're outsourcing. Scareclaw Kashtira is a level 7 Earth Psychic monster with 0 attack and 2600 defense, and during any main phase as a quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, banish a Kashtira or Scareclaw card from your hand or grave. This card can attack while in defense position, using its defense for damage calculation, very nice, and while on the field, negate the effects of any opponent's monster that battles with your Kashtira or Scareclaw monsters until the end of the turn. This new monster lacks the consistency boosting of the original Kashtira, but having a way to summon more of them while having monsters on the field is amazing. Now you're not as tied to Kashtira Birth to actually get your plays off the ground. Not to mention that Scareclaw now have an actual body to play without having to solely rely on the Link 3. And the effect negation is, okay, if a little slow. But hey, evil Cerberus Clifford here is doing their best, so cut him some slack. Tearlaments Kashtira is a level 7 water psychic monster with 2300 attack and 1200 defense, and has the same summoning effect as Scareclaw Kashtira, though it has you banishing either a Kashtira or a Tearlaments card. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can send the top 3 cards of either player's deck to the grave, and if this card is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can send the top 2 cards of your deck to the grave, making this the Light Swarm Minerva of the theme. Good grief, this is a mill machine! And while having another level 7 in Kashtira is very helpful, this plays very well with Tearlaments, though it can only be used as fusion material for Rukalos on theme. But having more cards in Grave means more targets for the crossover Kashtira to banish for their summon, and if any more themes in this storyline show up, they'll undoubtedly be added to that list, so more fodder ain't too bad. Just make sure you don't tear through your deck too quickly. And wouldn't you know it, Riseheart needs their own extra deck form as well. So now we get Kashtira Riseheart, a rank 7 Dark Machine Xyz monster with 3000 attack and defense, requiring 3 level 7 monsters as material. However, once per turn, if Kashtira Shangri-Ira activated any of its effects this turn, you can Xyz summon Kashtira Riseheart by using any Kashtira monster you control, transferring its materials over. While on the field, any card sent to the grave is banished instead, and once per chain, each time any number of cards are banished, attach 1 banished card to this card as material. And once per turn, as a quick effect, you can detach 3 material from this card, then target a card on the field and banish it face down. Wow, this is rough! It's a walking macrocosmos that has the bad habit of scooping up material and giving you quick effect banishing face down removal. And Shangri-Ira only requires 2 level 7s at minimum, so as long as you can get it to activate the zone occupying effect, you can slap a Riseheart on top of it to make a 3 material version. It's so good. Not to mention this is basically the best Baryon card ever printed. What, you think I'm off my rocker? It's a rank 7 monster, so look at its color scheme and tell me this isn't Chaos Xyz Baryon Hope. Yeah, that's what I thought. Alright, that's all the monsters, now it's time for the new spells and traps. Kashtira Papyrus is a normal spell card that targets a Kashtira monster you control, and it special summons a Kashtira monster with a different attribute from your deck in defense position.
Also, you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn except Xyz monsters.
If this card becomes banished, you can target one of your banished Kashtira cards except a copy of this card and add it to your hand. This makes summoning your rank 7s a breeze. On top of summoning your original Kashtira to search you more cards, being a way to recycle your banished Kashtira cards is pretty nifty. Remember, the Scareclaw and Tearlaments additions to the team banish cards for their summon, not just monsters, so this makes for the perfect companion to them. I've gotta say, Papyrus is a devilishly good card. Kashtira Overlap is a quick play spell that targets a monster on the field. On resolution, you banish a monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense from your hand, grave, or that's face up on either field. And if you do, the targeted monster gains 1500 attack. And if this card is banished and you control a Kashtira monster, you can target an effect monster your opponent controls and negate its effects until the end of the turn. This makes for a pretty good banish for Riseheart's effect, nullifying a monster for the turn so it doesn't cause you any problems. And by that point, it gives you a good target to get back to your hand with Papyrus's on banish effect. As for the activated effect, it's meh. Like, I can't think of a single monster that wouldn't like a permanent 1500 attack boost, don't get me wrong, but wanting something doesn't mean it's good for you. Getting Swole is nice for battle, but outside that circumstance, it isn't really doing anything. Though, I guess it does give you something to do with all those Vsauce clones we keep running into. Just don't rely on it too much, or else your opponent is going to be running laps around you. Prime Planet Parisos is a field spell card, and when activated, you can add 1 Kashtira monster from your deck to your hand. While on the field, monsters you control gain 100 attack and defense for each different attribute among monsters on the field, not just your side, and if a Kashtira Shangri-Ira you control activates its effect, except during the damage step, you can target a card on the field and destroy it. So not only does your big satellite cause a lot of annoyances, you can actually start causing some damage with it too. I wouldn't be surprised to see this card become as popular as Fenrir, if only for the fact that it searches Fenrir and gives it a pretty nifty power bonus, though it's not so important that, if you play your own field spell, you won't feel bad for playing it over this one, which means it isn't exactly occupying any prime real estate. Kashtira Big Bang is a normal trap card, and if a Kashtira Explained monster is on the field, make both players banish monsters from their field face down until they control only one. And if this card becomes banished, you can target a Kashtira Explained monster you control and add a Kashtira monster you own attached to it to your hand, then you can special summon it from your hand. Guess they didn't want to introduce the idea of special summoning directly from Explained material, huh? Oh well, more fun for the Digimon TCG, I suppose. With this, you can grab a free monster out from under your Shangri-Era or the evolved Arise Heart, but the real draw is the activated effect, being a kind of evenly matched that lets you keep something on board. The downside is that it only works on monsters and there's no way to activate it from your hand, though of course you can't forget the wonders of Trap Trick. Heck, you can even use it to get both effects of Big Bang in a single turn, while giving you the flexibility to get any other normal trap as needed. So if you're outnumbered, remember to keep this card in mind, because it'll give you a Big Bang for your buck. Alright, that's all the Kashtira cards, but to make sure we cover all the Vsauce lore, let's cover some support cards for the surrounding themes. First, we have a little update to the Beastie Boys' Scareclaw Defang, a continuous spell card that keeps your Scareclaw Link monsters and Vsauce Starfrosts you control from being targeted or destroyed by your opponent's card effects. And monsters destroyed in battle by your Scareclaw Link monsters and Vsauce Starfrost are banished instead of going to the grave. It can also banish a Scareclaw Link monster from your field or grave, then target a card your opponent controls and destroy it. That last effect would be a lot stronger if we had a bevy of Link monsters to choose from. But at time of recording, we only have the Link 3, which we'd rather not put in that position, and the Link 1, which, to be fair, is fine to banish once we've used their once per duel effect. The protection is also a nice touch. Tryhard is already a huge menace, and having that kind of blanket protection pushes it over the edge. It'd be an incredibly based card if not for the fact that the boss is stealing away your big Buster Sword and the helpful Nendoroid that it's made out of. I hate when bosses have those mechanics. Tearlaments Pearl Regia is a field spell that, like its counterpart, gives fusion monsters and Tearlaments monsters you control 500 attack. And if any number of Aqua-type Tearlaments monsters are sent to your grave by a card effect, except during the damage step, you can send a level 4 or lower Aqua monster from your deck to the grave. But if the sent monster isn't a Tearlaments monster, you can't activate cards or the effects of cards with that name for the rest of the turn. This lets you get another Tearlaments fusion effect into rotation after you trigger the first one, but it does give you quite a bit of options to send with that effect. There are around 150 cards that fit that framework. And while we'll want to avoid ones that have effects that trigger into the grave because we'd have to skip on them, there are a few exceptions that are pretty funny. King of the Swamp, for instance, fits that bill. While you can't activate its effects, being a named material for any fusion that specifically lists that material is a continuous effect. This can also get a Shari Suship into rotation, because it not being able to activate effects doesn't mean anything to a normal monster. But if your effects do get stunned, don't worry about jumping right in. The water's fine. Trivakarma is a normal trap card that targets a Vsauce Starfrost you control and an effect monster your opponent controls. You negate that opponent's monster's effect, and if you do, your monster gains attack equal to half that monster's original attack and defense, whichever is higher, which is kind of an extension of Vsauce's on-board effect. You can also banish this card from your grave to add a spell or trap card that mentions Vsauce Starfrost, except a copy of this card, from your deck to your hand. But you can only use one effect per turn, and only once per turn. Not really a helpful card unless you play Vsauce, but if you're splashing them into your deck, or playing any combination of Scareclaw, Tear, or Kashtira, you'll want to have a little support for the card that ties it all together. And to be fair, a lot of cards that are good for the individual themes without Vsauce do mention them, so you could just play Foolish Burial Goods as a search card for those in particular. Just be careful about callously throwing cards into the grave, because karma always finds a way to get back at you. Alright, that's all of our new cards, and since we covered tech picks last time, let's get straight into the lore. Last we left off, Vsauce had arrived at a planet that is now being identified as the Scareclaw one, in search of another member of the Heart clones. Lightheart had been defeated and subsequently joined Vsauce, while Kaleido Heart was outright slain by Kit Kalos, freeing the Tearlaments. Upon returning to the Realm of Fear, Vsauce fought off the Kashtira minions, eventually drawing the attention of their boss. And Riseheart didn't show up alone, as Kashtira Unicorn returned from its excursion. While the timeline is a little muddy, we can see that the Kashtiras arrived either just as or after Vsauce left Pelreno, and engaged Kit Kalos, who had recently upgraded to rule Kalkos, in battle. But the power increase unfortunately didn't help, as Unicorn arrived with a canister containing the mermaid matron within. Now, at first I thought the canisters might be corrupting the inhabitants, turning them into their Kashtira forms, but I don't think that's entirely accurate. These Crimson Conquerors seem to go around extracting resources, so what if negative emotions could be harvested from subjects to create a labor force? That's not even that far-fetched. Like Scareclaw, the act of causing fear in others, their world is called Reichphobia, the realm of fear, and Tearlaments, their sadness giving way to tears of beautiful pearls. Even the TCG translation of Kshatriy law reveals more information, as Ira is Latin for anger. Fear, sadness, anger. 3 very potent, powerful, and dark emotions that are now being used against our protagonists. And to further this theory, we need look no further than Scareclaw Kashtira, as it looks like the lower half of Scareclaw Triheart. In its battle with Vsauce, the Interstellar Warriors seem to have won and purified them, creating Lightheart in the process. But what happened to the other half of Triheart? Well, it seems the Kashtira were making great use of it. Riseheart was not too pleased to see Vsauce cutting down their minions, so decided it was time to make a radical upgrade. The artwork of Kashtira Papyrus shows Riseheart absorbing some kind of green energy, which appears to come from the First World Parasos where Riseheart calls home. Trivikarma also shows Vsauce doing the same at a presumably later date, but for now, Riseheart then interfaces with one of the Kashtira canisters, using it to draw out their anger, looking to overlap himself with this copy, using the tendrils of their cosmic arm to make the connection. Notably, all the heart monsters so far have had an extra deck form with 3000 attack, as well as defense where applicable, and Kashtira Overlap gives any of the base form monsters the power boost needed to match that. This process transforms Riseheart into their Ariseheart form, looking a lot more like the rest of the Kashtira. Vsauce pursues a Riseheart into the portal Riseheart had appeared in, and the two clash in Parasos, the 6th world. Eventually, a Riseheart reached out and absorbed Vsauce's blade, formed from the spirit of Lightheart, and so Vsauce was forced to do as Riseheart had done previously, drawing in the power of Parasos. However, instead of trying to exhume its power and control it from the outside like Riseheart had, Vsauce kept it within, causing their cosmic arm to swell with dark energy, throwing a punch that collided with a Riseheart's, bringing this chapter of the Vsauce storyline to a close. The name Big Bang is indicative of a whole new universe being born, but we won't know what the story has in store for us until the next chapter. However, there are some small tidbits I'd like to mention before we leave. One, it looks like we're actually going to get alternate forms of all the field spells, presumably how they are after the Kashtira influence has been removed. While we don't see this in the TCG translations, the OCG names translate to 4th World Destruction Reiphobia, 6th World Destruction Parasos, and First World Destruction Pelreno. But that one has now become the first world of the Graceful Ripple Songstresses. The numbers are also a pretty interesting note, and I think we've reached the most worlds we're going to see, with future sets exploring the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th worlds, and I'm basing this on the fact that all the worlds we have seen embody one of the 6 basic emotions. We've already seen fear, sadness, and anger, so we're due for worlds that focus on happiness, disgust, and surprise. There's also the Hindu connections that can be expanded upon from last episode, though I do need to make a correction. Last time I posited that a Brahmin-inspired archetype would be revealed to be the bosses of the Kashtira, based on a chart of the Hindu caste system I'd found while researching. But a few of you thankfully chimed in the comments and let me know that one didn't strictly have authority over the other. Brahmins were a higher class, but in regards to their duties, the Brahmins were focused on handling religious duties, while the Kashtira were in charge of military affairs. But with that cleared up, while I was trying to figure out what a papyrus was, I found a page that said that papyrus was often used as a proper name for a devil king in Buddhism, specifically of the 6th heaven of the world of desire, lining up pretty well with Parasos, the 6th world, associated with the Kashtira. Riseheart's Wikipedia article also notes that they may be a reference to Oda Nobunaga, one of the big huge feudal lords of the Warring States period of Japan. Not only are they wearing much more samurai-esque garb than any of the other hearts, Oda Nobunaga had a nickname as the Demon King of the 6th Heaven, so that's something. But that's kind of where my investigation runs cold. I wasn't able to find anything concrete. I tried looking up the first and fourth heavens of the World of Desire, but couldn't find anything that stood out to me as connecting them with Tearlaments or Scareclaw. So now, I'm calling on all of you with a special mission. Use this video as a jumping off point and see if you can find any more connections between what's presented here and Buddhism or Hinduism. Bonus points if those are subjects that you've really studied in. Then, whatever you find, share in the comments below so that we can all be scholars of Yu-Gi-Oh lore, because trust me, we could use a few more of those. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Cyberstorm Access has been revealed for quite a while now, which means it's time for my favorite part of new releases, more lore. Today, we're going to follow up on our interdimensional warrior Vsauce, whose name I've pronounced like that for so long that I don't plan on changing it anytime soon. Or until I get some kind of confirmation for proper pronunciation. Anyway, last we left our hero, they were squaring off against the malicious Arisehart, who sought to wield the power of hatred to dominate all they could lay their sinister hands on. And the last thing we saw was a clashing of fists, with Vsauce having used the Trivikarma technique, and now we pick up in a warm, glowing fairy tale land with more chibis in it. Bit of a scene change, but worry not, all will soon be revealed. Or at the very least, I'll explain it as best I can with the information we have available. So let's take stock of these new characters, tree how they all work together, then figure out what exactly is going on here. It's time to get to the root of it all with Manadium. So what's the deal with Manadium? Well, they're a series of fairy monsters, with a warrior heart monster, because of course there is, of various attributes, and honestly, it doesn't do a whole lot. It's got one synchro monster it's really good at making, and that's the whole shtick, though it can make a few other synchros if it wants to. It doesn't really lock you into anything in particular. But plenty of decks make synchros. What makes Manadium so special? Well, on destruction, our tuners summon other copies of themselves from the deck when destroyed, no matter who destroys them, which means it works particularly well with Vsauce. In fact, because they mesh with us so well, I think it's worth revisiting him one more time. Vsauce Starfrost is a level 6 light warrior tuner monster with 2100 attack and 1500 defense, and if they're in your hand, you can target a monster you control with a different type and attribute than this card, destroy it, and if you do, special summon this card from your hand. And when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can make this card gain attack equal to half the original attack or defense of that monster, whichever is higher. Your choice of tide. Now, you're not going to get a lot of mileage out of that effect. The important one is the special summon. It has variable synergies with other archetypes in the same story, but it works very well here because it's going to trigger your effects for free. So expect Manadium decks to be running this unironically, whereas you might see it in the others to get random effects that call for having this monster on the field. Good to have you on the team, Michael. Alright, reintroductions are out of the way, let's focus back on the main event. First up is Manadium Meek, a level 2 water fairy tuner monster with 0 attack and 1800 defense, and if you control a Vsauce Starfrost or a monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense, you can special summon this card from your hand, and you can only special summon this card this way once per turn. If this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon a Manadium Meek from your deck, then you can increase that monster's level by 2. Now, I shouldn't have to remind you why this card cares about monsters with 1500 attack and 2100 defense, because you have been watching the Vsauce videos, right? But just in case you're just getting into the lore, all of Vsauce's body doubles have the same stat line, 1500 attack and 2100 defense. So you could technically run this in any of those themes as well, which would give them some nifty synchro access. And when combined with Vsauce, you get to essentially summon them for free, giving you a level 6 tuner, and either a level 2 or 4 tuner, depending on if you use the level buff effect. Now, you might be wondering, why would having multiple tuners with no non-tuners available be a good thing? Ho, we'll get to that in just a second. But for now, just know that it is, in fact, amazing. So don't be shy about using him. After all, the Meek shall inherit the synchros. Manadium Hearless is a level 2 Earth Fairy Tuner monster with 0 attack and 2000 defense. You can special summon this card from your hand if you control Vsauce or one of those 1500 attack, 2100 defense monsters, and if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon another copy of this card from your deck, and synchro monsters you control gain 500 attack during each battle phase this turn. This is an interesting buff because it doesn't apply immediately. It's more like a weird lingering effect, which I am thankful for. If it only worked on synchros you already controlled, you'd have to find a way to make the synchro first, then summon this for its own destruction. And it should be noted that while you can only special summon these Manadomes from hand once per turn using their condition, their floating effect is not a hard once per turn, so you could stack this again to give your synchros 1,000. That's kinda neat. And because it doesn't specify any specific synchros, this will technically give a healthy boost to any synchro you go into. So even if the synchro of your choice isn't very strong, Hearless means you'll have nothing to fear. Manadome Reonheart is a level 4 Light Warrior monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense, and during your main phase, if this card is in your hand, as a quick effect, you can target a Manadome monster or a monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense you control, destroy it, and if you do, special summon this card. And if this card is normal or special summoned, you can add a Manadome card from your deck to your hand, except a copy of itself. So this is the requisite warrior of the bunch, and is a lovely extender and play starter. It pops your Manadomes to trigger their summon effect, just like Vsauce does, and searches out any card in your theme when summoned. It's basically anything you could ever want in an archetype, but hey, big shocker, the Vsauce lookalike being a 3 of must play in your deck. Where have I seen that before? Manadome Primeheart is a level 10 Light Fairy Synchro monster with 3000 attack and defense, requiring, and get this, 1 or more tuners and a light monster as material. Don't worry, we're gonna get how wild that is in just a bit. This card can make a number of attacks each battle phase up to the number of tuners used as its synchro material. Your opponent can't target this card with card effects if it used a Manadome tuner as material, and if this face-up synchro summoned card in its owner's control leaves the field by an opponent's card, you can special summon one of your Vsauce Starfrosts, or one of your monsters with 1500 attack and 2100 defense that's banished or is in your grave. Okay, let's circle back to the elephant in the room. Yes, this is the first synchro monster since XX Saber Gothams that you can use all tuners on. Jack's double tuning exists, sure, but that still needs a non-tuner to work. And while you can use a non-tuner for this one, that last part just says it needs a light monster, but it doesn't say it needs a non-tuner light. So because of this, you can pair your Manadome tuners with Vsauce, who is also a tuner. You can either use Vsauce and a level boosted Meek, or a Vsauce and 2 level 2 Manadome tuners, in which case this gets 3 attacks, and nothing about this effect says those attacks have to be on monsters. Combine this with that targeting protection and a floating effect for when they get past this, and you've got a very capable game ender on your hands. And because of the material requirements, it may crop up in lists you may not expect. I feel like it's only a matter of time before this becomes the go-to junk speeder payoff, and that's just prime. Manadome Abscission is a normal spell card that targets a monster you control, destroys it, and if you do, adds a Primal Planet Calorium from your deck to your hand, which is our deck's field spell. Or, if you already control Primal Planet Calorium, you can add a Manadome spell or trap card from your deck to your hand, except a copy of this card. You can also banish this card from your grave to special summon a Vsauce Starfrost, or a monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense from your hand. This is another card that pairs very nicely with your Manadome tuners, so you'll just get another copy back and gives you access to your impeccable field spell, which we'll get into in a moment. And it even comes with an alt effect if you already have the field spell, turning this into another on-theme spell or trap card to really maximize your utility. It may seem like a pretty brainless way to build a deck where everything is at your fingertips at times, but hey, sometimes you just want a piece of that low-hanging fruit. Manadome Imagining is a normal spell card that has you revealing a Manadome monster or a Vsauce Starfrost in your hand. You draw 2 cards, then place a card from your hand on the bottom of the deck. You can also banish this card from your grave, then target a monster you control with 1500 attack and 2100 defense, and it's treated as a tuner for the rest of the turn. That last one doesn't really add a lot of immediate value, but can help you with bridging the gap on getting to the synchros you need, and can even add more attacks to your Primeheart. But the primary draw is the draw. And what I like best is how it interacts with Garnets, those cards in your deck you never really want to actually see in your hand, but are nonetheless integral to your combos. Now, Manadome doesn't really have any of those inherently. Its primary function, aside from drawing new cards, is to put your Manadome tuners from your hand back into your deck, since their floating effects only pull from the deck. But it does mean you can now include engines that do have Garnets, because now you have a way to reset them even if you draw them. An understated but very potent effect. I can only imagine the kinds of things you can get up to with this. Primal Planet Calorium is a field spell card, and when this card is activated, you can add a Manadome monster or Vsauce Starfrost from your deck to your hand. While on the field, light monsters you control gain 100 attack for each tuner you control or is in your grave, and if any number of face-up tuners you control are destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target one of them and special summon it. This is another really great piece of support that not only searches us our monsters, as these field spells tend to do, but also keeps our tuner supply stocked up so we can make sure we have enough to go into Primeheart. It even makes Primeheart more dangerous. 100 attack per tuner isn't a lot, but when you have 2 or 3 tuners, being added to a monster with multiple attacks, that can cause a huge boost in overall damage that can't be overlooked. Heck, it'll stack with the bonus you're presumably already getting from Hearless. Your opponent might underestimate your ability to put in damage when looking at just the tiny orb creatures, but once they see this, they're gonna change their tuners. Manadium Breakheart is a normal trap card that targets a tuner or synchro monster in your grave and special summons it. Then, if it was a light monster, you can destroy a monster your opponent controls with equal or lower attack. And if a Vsauce Starfrost and or monsters with 1500 attack and 2100 defense you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish this card from your grave instead. So hey, you get a pretty sweet revival tool, and while you don't get any of Primal Heart's bonus effects if summoned this way, they're still pretty big, and will end up blowing up something with 3000 or less attack when they hit the field, which covers, most monsters. And even things above 3000 aren't necessarily safe because of your field spell. There's also the little protection that you get set up in your grave, though it only works on Vsauce and their clones, not any of your Manadomes or extra deck monsters. It's weird that it's a Manadome card in that regard, because it very minimally protects Manadomes, but the rest of the card is pretty on point. This is just a really strange break from the usual design. Manadome Reframing is a counter trap card that can be activated when a spell or trap card or a monster effect is activated, while you control a synchro monster to negate the activation. Then, if you have a Vsauce Starfrost or a monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense on the field or in the grave, you can also destroy that card. You can also banish this card from your grave, then target up to 3 Manadome monsters in your grave and shuffle them into the deck. You don't draw any cards for this, but considering how fast you can churn through your Manadomes with those floating effects, it's still pretty helpful. The main effect is also really nice. The destruction being tied to having a Vsauce or their clones in rotation kinda sucks, but you're very much incentivized to run them, so it's not too bad. And besides, if you're running Primeheart, which tuner you think is going to be in the grave for it? And even if you don't get the destruction, you don't always need it. It's kind of worthless against things like normal spells and traps. Not to mention hand traps. Or at least the Ash variety, not the Gamma variety. It might seem like you're missing out, but all it takes to really appreciate this card is to reframe your perspective. Alright, that does it for the Manadome cards, but we've got a small group of other related cards that we should cover, as they're all related to Vsauce in one way or another. Vicious Estroud is a level 8 Dark Fairy fusion monster with 3000 attack and defense, requiring Vsauce Starfrost and another monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense, and must be special summoned from the extra deck by banishing the above cards you control from your field and or grave. It can be destroyed by battle, and if this card is special summoned, you can target one other monster on the field and destroy it. And if you do, this card gains attack equal to half the destroyed monster's original attack or defense, whichever is higher. What a familiar effect. But yeah, this is a pretty cool card that gives you more of a reason to play Vsauce Starfrost and its associated themes, especially because you don't have to worry about setting up a particular field. And when you do summon this, you get a big monster, free removal, and it gets even bigger after that removal. There's also a lot to unpack here in terms of lore, but we'll get to that later on. For now, the name is more than appropriate because this thing is vicious. Kashtira Extra is a quick play spell card, and if any number of face-up Kashtira Exceeds monsters you control are destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can banish a Vsauce Starfrost from your hand, deck, or monster zone, and if you do, special summon a Vicious Estroud from your extra deck, ignoring summoning conditions. And if this card is banished, you can target one of your banished Vsauce Starfrosts and add it to your hand. This is the primary way you're going to access Vicious in Kashtira, considering that it's the one theme that doesn't actually play very well with Vsauce. And Arise Heart ain't exactly doing us any favors since it basically shuts off the graveyard. And it thankfully even gets you back Vsauces that are banished so you can do this all over again. Though you gotta be careful with this one, Kashtira Extra really shows the dangers of catching them all. Put too many of your clones together and you'll turn into a massive death creature. How's that for a fusion? Wait, does that mean that Vsauce is QREM? World of Boundless Consciousness is a normal trap card that you can activate if a Vicious Estroud is on either field. You target a card on the field, destroy it, and if you do, if the destroyed card's original name is Vicious Stroud, you can special summon one of your banished Vsauce Starfrosts. Otherwise, you can make a Vicious Stroud you control gain 1500 attack. This is a bit of a weird one, not gonna lie, but if Vsauce decks become major contenders in tournament settings, it might actually become a legitimate tech pick. It can be played in the theme itself to give you more removal and another big boost, but it can also be used in retaliation to destroy an opposing Stroud, at which point you get a Vsauce back. It's actually kinda cool, but only really works in the wild if it's likely both players are running Vicious. It just goes to show that lore can make a world of difference in the meta. Alright, so that's all the new cards, but what do we do with them? Well, there isn't much of a win condition here aside from summoning Prime Heart and just kicking all kinds of butt. So our goal is to get all the pieces on board as soon as possible so we can make that happen. So what can we play to help them out? First, let's take a look at Clear New World, a spell card that's reflected in Vsauce's arm. At first, it might seem really good, since it destroys our mana domes, but it's not going to be useful in summoning other copies of them. Even if they weren't all fairies, you have to summon a monster with a lower level. Now, if you do end up playing any level 1 monsters, this could end up being a great way to grab them while triggering your floating effects, but that's about it. At least when it comes to running a purer version of the deck. If we start playing different archetypes from across the lore, then things get a little funky, especially if we combine this deck with Tearlaments. By popping Sheeran, Havness, or Rhinoheart, you can summon a Mana Dome tuner while triggering the effect of those Tearlaments. And since neither theme locks you out of the other summoning methods, you can mix the power of Fusion and Synchro with these spare tuners. Ain't that a trip? Clear New World can also be used as a bridge in Scareclaw and Kashtira, but they won't really have the same kind of synergy. Vsauce and ReonPotato are enough material to make Prime Heart, but in that scenario it's not exactly powerful. You don't even get the targeting protection because Vsauce isn't a Mana Dome, so in this case, go ahead and Synchro Summon for Chaos Angel. Use those two monsters, and you get the on-summon banish, and keeps all Synchro monsters you control from being affected by your opponent's activated monster effects, which is undeniably snazzy. But as long as we're covering level 10 Synchros, that's not even the best we've got. Barone is of course a free negate, and once you've used that effect up, you can trade them in to revive ReonPotato for a free search. You can also make Cheng-Ying for an amazingly defensive body that provides some ridiculous buffs and debuffs, and that's not even the best of it. Once you have Vsauce and ReonPotato in the grave, you can banish both to get Vsauce's Shroud, which will not only prompt the destruction effect that it gets, but Cheng-Ying's banishes. It's so cool. As for a silly tech pick, Battle Tuned is really funny. Sure, you could instead banish Vsauce to help make a Shroud, but you can do a ton more damage by putting a 2100 point boost on Prime Heart. Yeah, a Shroud is 3000, but even one extra attack on Mana Dome means 4200 extra attack on board. So if you want to go for lethal even faster, this is the card to do it. Okay, we've covered all the cards and what you can do with them mechanically. Now it's time for what you all really came here for. Lore. Like I said at the top of the episode, we're currently in the aftermath of the clash between Vsauce and Arizeheart. The right arm of the cosmos wielded by our protagonist appears to have been shrouded in dark power, and via the card Kashtira Extra, you can see that Vsauce won the battle. Not only does the art show fragments of Arizeheart being absorbed, the card itself is triggered when a Kashtira Exceeds monster is destroyed. But the cost may have been too great, because what happens when you activate Extra is bad news, as it brings forth the terrifying Vicious Stroud, the form of Vsauce after having absorbed their 3 heart counterparts. And that's not just speculation, everything from the art to the mechanics reinforce this reading. While its fusion material being a Vsauce and 3 monsters with 1500 attack and 2100 defense would have been much more accurate, the fact that it requires even one of them is a huge hint. And incorporating Vsauce's effect to gain attack by destroying something is a nice touch. The art also has a slew of clues, from the blatant hound sword that's evocative of Triheart, to the more subtle whip spears of Kaleidoheart. Arizeheart appears to be missing from this arrangement, but the wings on a Shroud are a deep red and share some resemblance to Arize's. But what I like most are the 4 sparks hovering around a Shroud's right claw, the same comet-shaped flames that we've seen in many cards before, when Vsauce was traveling throughout the universe. And we can tell which flame belongs to who because of the color of each of their hair. Vsauce is light blue, Rykard is green, Rhinoheart is deep blue, and Rizeheart is red. But what exactly caused this transformation? Well, I have two theories. One is that Vsauce has been overloaded, and the large intake of power, not to mention the psyches of 3 other beings, has caused Vsauce to turn into a vicious beast. But what I find more compelling is that this is Aryse's last gambit. They've already shown that they can steal the power of other hearts, as seen in Scareclaw Defang, so while Aryse was defeated in battle, their essence may still be around, acting on its own free will, kind of like how Lightheart is still their own entity even after being defeated. And once they've been absorbed, Aryseheart begins to exert control, resulting in this abomination. But what does this mean for Calarium, land of the Manadome, and the 5th world of destruction? This is set up to be another world akin to the others, but given what we see, I think it's safe to assume that Calarium is the internal world of Vsauce, not its own specific world. First off, let's take a look at ReonPotato, who looks exactly like Vsauce. Okay, that's not really groundbreaking considering the clones, but this looks almost exactly alike. Normally, the clones have a different hairstyle and clothing and other accessories, and yeah, the hair here is slightly different, the bangs are a bit diverging, and ReonPotato has that kickin' ponytail, but the armor is exactly the same, the only difference appearing to be the greaves that ReonPotato has. Although there is one other key piece missing from their ensemble, ReonPotato doesn't have the right arm of the cosmos, which to me makes sense in this context. The arm appears to be the focal point that absorbs the other hearts, but as a creature of Vsauce's mind, they wouldn't exactly need that. But the final thing about ReonPotato that cinches it for me is that constant golden glow, which just feels very ephemeral. But what about the rest of the Manadome? Well, the fruits of the trees seem to me like a dead giveaway. We haven't seen any of the other worlds have a tree that reflects aspects of the others, and both Reichphobia and Pearl Reno are places Vsauce has been and has absorbed that world's heart, so to speak. So if this is a mental world, it makes sense that the central landmark, a giant tree, having their souls be some kind of fruit connected to it lines up. In fact, if I could go a bit further, I wanted to try and identify what kind of tree this might be, but I haven't had any luck in that so far, if this is supposed to be a parallel to a real tree at all. My first guess was that this was supposed to be a Bodhi tree, the kind that Siddhartha Gautama meditated under to achieve enlightenment, and thus became the first Buddha. But those kinds of trees have heart-shaped leaves, and if we take a look at Abscission, we can see that's not the case here. The closest plant that these flowers look like are lotuses, which don't grow on trees, so I feel a little silly putting so much stock in it here, but they are associated with spiritual awakenings and enlightenment. This could indicate that the tiny creatures within the flowers are nascent reincarnations of the other hearts, elevating them to a higher plane by shedding them of their worldly desires. But again, this isn't fact, more of an educated hypothesis. Now, having hopefully established that we are now inside the mind of Vsauce, we can better understand why Vicious Estroud is making an appearance here. Whether it's the embodiment of primal, mindless rage, or an extension of Aryseheart trying to assert their dominance, Rhea must now do battle with this demon for control of Vsauce. Estroud appears out of nowhere, firing blasts that look like the soul flames of the 3 hearts, plus Vsauce, with 2 of them taking out 2 fruits of the tree. And I hardly think that it's a coincidence that the 2 colors of blasts that hit, deep blue and green, match up with the 2 Manadome tuners that have been released so far. If these really are fruits meant to give rise to new forms of the heart monsters, it's not in Estroud's best interest to allow them to mature, so destroying them is a top priority. From what we can tell though, the battle is fairly straightforward. ReonPotato draws on the power of the remaining fruits to become Prime Heart and absolutely kicks Estroud around like a beanbag, culminating in one of, if not the, sickest aerial dive kicks I've ever seen on a card. Though I believe it'd have to be the technique used in Manadome Breakheart that actually makes Estroud vulnerable to destruction, as the fusion can't be destroyed by battle. Also, the move is called Breakheart, and the fight is against an amalgam of the heart monsters. The dive kick, though, is what allows things to move on to the next step of the journey, the reframing. Prime Heart makes contact, and like so much glass, shatters Vicious Estroud, and also the world of Calarium. World of Boundless Consciousness shows Vsauce floating in a void, with parts of their vicious hide crumbling away, and shards falling all around them. And in the most prominent shard of them all is the Tree of Calarium. And so, in this world where consciousness has no end, this starbound warrior has infinite possibilities stretched out before him. Heck, even the mechanics of the card itself shows a very important choice, either giving you the chance to destroy Vicious or empower it. The amount that it boosts by is also very deliberate, as it would be half of Prime Heart, mimicking the kind of boost Vicious' Shroud would get if it destroyed it via its own effect. Either way, Vsauce must now find a path forward, harboring the fear, sadness, and anger of the other hearts, but maybe, just maybe, carrying the joy of compassion and enlightenment from Reon. But while anything is possible, what can we expect to happen? Well, for that, it's best to look at the influences on the theme, and for that, I think it's pretty safe to say that Hinduism is where we're gonna find most of our answers. And thankfully, some of the translation notes and some helpful commenters pointed me in the right direction. Manadom's name is likely derived from the name Vamana, one of the avatars of Vishnu, one of the most important deities among the Hindu pantheon. Instead of intervening directly in issues that caused an imbalance in the universe, a concept known as Dharma, Vishnu would send incarnations of themselves, the avatars, to accomplish these tasks instead. Notably, Vamana is the 5th of these avatars, which lines up with the fact that Calarium, the field spell for Manadum, is the 5th world of destruction, which is a detail on all the field spells that you would only know if you read the translations. I am once again very upset with how the TCG has handled this localization. And if you look into this more, you get some other awesome references here. The task Vamana is most known for is taking back the Trilokia from King Mahabali to restore cosmic order. Trilokia as a concept has been used to refer to a number of different trios of things, but in general, it means the 3 spheres. And while there's only been 2 spheres introduced as monsters in Manadomes, Meek and Hearless, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a 3rd one representing Riseheart somewhere on the tree, probably called Hangry. You can also even see a 3rd fruit in the field spell's art. So this battle against Vicious is probably meant to emulate taking back those spheres. And I love how the story goes. Basically, Mahabali is giving out gifts because of their great conquests, and Vamana, who's a dwarf, asks for but 3 steps of land. Whatever they can step on, he gets. And Bahamali is like, yeah, sure. Their feet are even smaller than usual, so they'll take even less land. Go ahead. Now, Bahamali's advisors catch on to this and attempt to warn him away from agreeing to this, but, you know, this is the great Bahamali, right? What could possibly stand in his way, right? But once the agreement is struck, Vamana takes on the cosmologically large size of Vishnu and uses 1 step each to cover all 3 spheres. 1 for heaven, 1 for earth, and 1 for the nether realms. And just like that, boom, problem solved, cosmic order restored. So this is why the 2 Manadome tuners are so small, because it's a reference to Vamana's size, and why Reonheart and Primeheart have such a focus on Greaves and Kicks, because of the steps. And get this, the gigantic form of Vamana is called the Trivikrama. You know, like the trap card from the last set, Trivikarma. Absorbing power to defeat a wicked ruler seems pretty on point, and this might also cast Riseheart in the role of Mahabali. It's amazing, simply amazing. I'd also like to really quickly touch on the other worlds now that I've learned about these connections. Palreno is the first world, which lines up with the first avatar of Vishnu, Matsya, who's depicted as half fish, so, you know, like a mermaid. The story features a fish that asks a king for shelter until it grows enough to fend for itself, and will help the king survive a catastrophic flood in the future. And Palreno is pretty flooded, as it turns out. Vsauce's battle against Kaleidoheart might be a vague attempt to mirror this story, because if Vsauce is considered to be the king and Kaleidoheart the calamitous flood, them taking on the fusion would give Kit Kalos enough time to find the strength to take down Kaleidoheart themselves, growing into Rule Kalos. The king, having survived this flood, lives on to foster a new generation of humanity, which might also be why Tearlaments get a new field spell to show off the more peaceful future ahead for them. The 4th world is Reichphobia, which lines up with the 4th avatar of Vishnu, Narasimha, the man-lion. And if you look at Reichardt, yeah, that fits. They're often depicted with 3 eyes, which is probably the inspiration for the 3-headed Triform. Narashima's primary accomplishment is the defeat of the Ashura Hiranyakashipu, who had received a blessing from another god, Brahma, which granted him basically conditional invulnerability. Get this, they couldn't be killed during the day or night, inside or outside a house, either in the sky or on land, in heaven or hell, by any weapon, nor by man, animal, deva, or ashura. So Narasima basically finds a midpoint between all of these conditions, meets them all at once, then kills the guy. He does the deed at dawn, or dusk, I couldn't confirm that, at the threshold of a house. On his lap, which is higher than the ground but still connected to it, was a half animal, half human, so it wasn't a man or a beast, was done in the mortal realm between heaven and hell, and used their claws instead of a weapon. It's so cool. I love this stuff. I'm reading this stuff for the first time, it's really cool. Even the way Triheart is defeated in Sklash looks kind of like depictions of the Ashura's defeat. But what does this have to do with Reichphobia? Well, Triheart kind of has its own form of conditional invulnerability too, being unaffected by activated monster effects of defense position monsters. So how do you get past it? Well, by using another Link monster, which can't be changed to defense position by Triheart's continuous effect. So we can kind of infer from this that while each realm represents one of Vishnu's reincarnations, the hearts themselves represent the obstacle that defines that reincarnation, which Vsauce fulfills, which might go a bit to explaining why Heart just is Vsauce. The sixth world is Paraisos, which is in line with the sixth avatar of Vishnu, Parashurama, and in response to the Kshatriya class abusing their power, taking what belonged to others by force, boy did we call that one, huh? Parashurama destroyed the Kshatriyas 21 times, and boy is that a specific number. First off, now the 2100 defense stat of the heart monsters makes sense, and now I can't wait to find out what the 1500 is tied to. But also, take a look at Arise Heart's material, 3 level 7 monsters. And what do you get when you multiply those two numbers together? 21! This stuff goes deep, folks, it just will not quit. So what can we expect moving forward? Well, while there are 10 reincarnations of Vishnu, we've already talked about how we're covering the 6 basic emotions as well, and we've already established the 6th world, so unless we get a big change to the formula, we won't be covering anyone from Rama forward, at least for now. This leaves us with Karma, the second avatar associated with turtles, specifically the World Turtle. I'm putting my money on this one having the Dark attribute heart and is focused on disgust. And the third avatar, Varaha, a boar who lifts the world from the cosmic ocean after it was stolen by a demon. And that's going to be the Wind heart that's focused on surprise. As for where the story is going from here, well, something we haven't talked about is that specific reincarnations are summoned during certain periods of time called yugas, and as time progresses through these yugas, things get progressively worse for everyone in that world, until the completion of the 4th and final Kali Yuga, which leads to the destruction of that world and the birth of another. So will Vsauce end up absorbing more hearts, risking the emergence of Vicious Estroud once again, and potentially continuing the cycle of destruction and rebirth, or will the cycle at last be broken? Or heck, is breaking the cycle even a good thing in the first place? We're just gonna have to wait a few more months until we get a peek at the next chapter of the world destruction story. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Duelist Nexus is upon us, and there's a surprising lack of lore to talk about here. It's actually been the biggest thing I look forward to when a new set gets released, but at the moment there's only a single Albaz lore card that doesn't even name drop Ice Jades in it, despite the fact that mechanically it fits right in with them. And you know, the absolutely kickin' art. And with no new archetypes that could feasibly carry a story in this set, the only thing we can really talk about is the Visa story, which appears to wrap up nearly all the loose ends, while dangling one last one in true Yu-Gi-Oh! Card lore fashion. In fact, for those of you just joining us, let's do a bit of a recap. Visa's Starfrost, intergalactic warrior of, well, not even they know, was able to absorb their fellow emotion clones, but that just caused a psychedelic cascade failure, transforming them into the monstrous vicious Astrolaud, which always makes a dramatic entrance. This moves the action to Visas' Mindscape, which is currently being attacked by Astrolaud, and is defended by the fragment of Visas that represents joy, Heart, taking on the form of Heart, protecting Calarium with its special defensive ability, and causing Astrolaud to feel very unsafe due to its multiple energy blades. The battle ended with Heart sacrificing itself to rid Visas of the toxic influence of Astrolaud, but what happens next in this world of boundless consciousness? That's a good question, and I'm gonna give you all the answers. First, we're gonna take a look at what the new cards do, then examine the mechanics, art, and what they're based on to get you up to date not just on these new tools, but also what's going on in the story. It's time for the Duelist Nexus Visas cards Explained. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons and the fine people over at Dragon Shield. If you want to protect your cards with the strongest scales on the market that even come with their own lore while supporting the channel, use my affiliate link in the description. So what's the deal with, well, all these new cards? Well, they appear to be general use cards for anything that uses Visas Starfrost. While Manadium seems to have become the primary home for running this level 6 tuner monster, all of the associated themes utilize them in one way or the other. So whether you're attempting to enhance your Scareclaw, Tearlaments, or Kashtira deck, or trying to jam them all into one wild mix, these cards can potentially help you out. First up, we've got a direct update to one of our 4 themes. Manadium Trid is a level 2 Fire Fairy tuner monster with 0 attack and 1500 defense, and if you control Visas Starfrost, or a monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense, you can special summon this card from your hand. And if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon a Manadium tuner from your deck, but you can only use this effect once per turn, which is a bit of a departure from the other 2, since their replacement effects are not hard once per turns. Though, since Trid turns into either of the other 2, this isn't much of an issue, especially because Trid lacks any utility effects that you could get from your other Manadium. So honestly, the hard once per turn is only going to be an issue in very niche situations. Overall, having more names is really going to help your consistency, so even with this minor roadblock, it's nothing to get angry over. Next up is Vita Karantha, a level 8 Dark Warrior monster with 2500 attack and 2100 defense, and if any number of cards on the field are destroyed by a card effect and Visas Starfrost is on the field, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then you can add a Clear New World from your deck or grave to your hand. And if any number of other monsters in your possession are destroyed by a card effect, except during the damage step, you can target a monster your opponent controls, destroy it, and if you do, this card gains attack equal to that monster's original attack until the end of this turn. Hey, a card that actually uses the spell card we've been referencing this entire series. Neat! Vita allows for a cool play sequence where you can pop a monster to summon Visas from hand, and then since you control it, you can summon Vita from hand, grabbing you Clear New World. Then you use Clear New World, destroying Visas, to summon any level 5 or lower non-light, non-warrior monster. Its effects are negated, but with the broad range of monsters you can summon, you can grab a lot of utility pieces, ranging from tuners to monsters that have great graveyard effects, making this a stupendous card to add into Manadium. And because it can grab Clear New World from the graveyard, you don't actually need to run more than one copy of it, which is great for anyone with a cramped main deck. The fact that Vita absorbs the whole attack from the destruction effect but only for the turn, as opposed to Visas getting half the attack when destroyed by battle but the increase is permanent, makes me want to say that Vita is the evil version of Visas, but we've actually already had at least 2 of those, so this is like the cooler, eviler Visas. Speaking of which, we have the self-actualization of our favorite Star Warrior, Visas Amritara, a level 8 Light Warrior Synchro Tuner monster with 2500 attack and 2100 defense, requiring 1 or more tuners and a light monster as material, just like Primeheart, though this one is 2 levels lower. This card's name becomes Visas Starfrost while in the monster zone, very important for all the effects relying on the name, and if this card is synchro summoned, you can add a spell or trap card that mentions Visas Starfrost from your deck to your hand. And during your main phase, you can destroy a monster you control. Also for the rest of the turn, all synchro monsters you control will gain 800 attack. This is markedly less powerful than Primeheart is in battle, but something tells me that's not really the point of this card. With its ability to grab any Visas-related spell or trap card, you can grab 3 of the 4 archetypal field spells, several of their utility cards ranging from Tearlaments Heartbeat to Manadium Reframing, or probably the strongest of all, Trivakarma, which acts as targeted monster negation, a stat boost, and can then search you another Visas spell or trap card once it's in the graveyard. And that's just what you can do with the search. The monster pop for the Synchro boost gives you a great buff across all your Synchro monsters, but also enables any of your on-destruction effects. See Manadium and Vita for more details, and can be used as a rung in the ladder for bigger Synchro monsters. The level 2 Manadium tuners can turn this into Primeheart to unlock its full power, while still benefiting from the 800 point boost you got from Amritara, or grab a non-tuner and use this to make Barone. But probably the biggest revelation here is that, like, for the first time, we see Vsauce smile. How nice. The Worlds as One is a normal spell card that has you activating one of 2 effects. You either special summon a monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense from your grave, basically the 6 Vsauce clones of Reichheart, Rhinoheart, Riseheart,
Heart, Wind-Up Zenmaines, and Infinitrack Drag Shovel, or you shuffle 5 of your monsters from across your banished zone, face-up field and or grave into your deck, those cards being 1 Visas Starfrost and 4 of the aforementioned aspects. And if you do, special summon a Visas Synchro monster from your extra deck, and this summon is treated as a Synchro summon. Now at the moment there's only Amritara to choose from, but we'll see if that changes in the future. For now, this appears to serve 2 functions: a reborn for what amounts to the best monsters in any of the associated archetypes, or as a way to access Amritara more easily in a deck that combines all the themes. An interesting idea to be sure, and I suspect it'll see play purely for its first effect, but if anyone knows how Wind-Ups combo with Kashtira, my ears are wide open. Pristine Planet's Amritara is a field spell card that you can only activate if Visas Starfrost is on the field, and once per turn, if any number of monsters you control are destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the grave or are banished, you can activate one of these effects. You either special summon one of those monsters in defense position, one tuner on the field gains attack equal to half the attack of one of those destroyed monsters, shuffle one of those destroyed monsters into the deck, and if you do, draw a card, or shuffle this card into your deck, and if you do, add a field spell card from your grave to your hand. Ooh, that is a lot of functionality for just one card. Now, you might see that activation restriction and think this card is unplayable, but remember, you can search this with Visas Amritara, which acts as Visas Starfrost, so it's actually a lot easier to deploy than you might think. As for what it can be used for, the effects are actually pretty straightforward. The best one to use in any given situation is going to depend on what the board state is. Maybe you want the destroyed monster back to shore up your defenses or keep the effect around. Maybe you need Amritara to get even bigger to run over a problem monster. Or perhaps a draw is in order. Maybe even recycling a field spell will get you back into the game. Though, notably, it doesn't specify any kind of restriction on what kind of field spell you can get, just that you have to grab it from the graveyard, so beware of any floodgate shenanigans. Look, I know they want to keep the planets pristine and all, they just got them cleaned, but locking out the grave with Necro Valley so nothing crawls back out may have been a bit much. New World Formation is a normal trap card that targets a spell or trap card in your grave that mentions Visas Starfrost and sets it to your field, and if it's a trap card or quick play spell card, you can activate it this turn. And you can banish this card from your grave, then target 3 spell or trap cards that mention Visas Starfrost, accept copies of this card, and shuffle them into the deck. Notably, the first effect doesn't have the same restriction as the second, so you can target New World Formation with the on-field effect of New World Formation, effectively having them swap places. However, because there is a hard once per turn on the effect, you can't just infinitely activate this over and over again on the same turn, so just a funny fact. This is yet another card that we can use to reset our field spells, as well as all the cool cards that I mentioned earlier that you can search off of Amritara. And because New World Formation essentially copies these cards for you with little to no time delay, you can afford to run less of them and use these as wild cards. You might actually find people running this in Tearlaments as a way to get back milled spells and trap cards to either use them as intended or get more value for their grave effects. And the recycling certainly isn't bad either, especially in more focused builds where you can get back your powerful engine cards. Being a trap card is devastatingly slow, but with this level of utility, there's a world of possibilities open to you. New World Full of Stars is a continuous trap card, and the first time each monster you control would be destroyed by battle each turn while you control Visas Starfrost, it is not destroyed. And during your end phase, if you control Visas Starfrost, you can target a monster in your grave and shuffle it into the deck, or if you control a Tuner Synchro monster, you can add it to your hand instead. In essence, you get to recycle a monster for free at the end of each of your turns if you have Visas, but if you have Amritara, you get to just add that monster back to your hand. And because it works on any monster, not just our Visas related ones, you can grab back on theme monsters or powerful hand traps, an especially relevant choice because this only works during your end phase, letting you prepare for a number of outcomes depending on what you think your opponent is capable of. But you're gonna have to tell me what's so new about the new World of Stars. We've seen everyone here before. This isn't a coming attractions section, this is a Smash roster. Alright, so that's all the cards. And because they're meant to be used as needed to either enhance existing themes or facilitate a big combo conglomerate, I think we should skip the usual tech pick section and move on to the lore of the cards. For a detailed rundown of what's happening so far, check out the playlist linked here for more videos on the subject, but like I said at the beginning, our story finds us with Visas, having finally defeated Vicious Astrolaud, and is at a crossroads. With all the versions combined in a single place, Visas has a tremendous amount of power at their disposal, but to what end should it be used for? Vicious Astrolaud was an example of one such path: just burn it all down. After all, every place they had visited so far was full of such fear, sadness, and hate that it didn't make much sense to make it go on. Better to just break it all down and avoid the pain. And judging from the landscape, it had already done quite a bit of work in that regard. But Astrolaud was missing a very important part, a positive to balance out the negatives: joy. Not only was it something worth living for, but it helped put all the other emotions in context, the tree filtering these feelings into little bubbly fruits. Because while these feelings have many sources, it's the idea of losing something precious that oftentimes spurns them into existence. People, places, memories. The idea of losing things that are close to our hearts like that doesn't always result in positive feelings. But these negative ones aren't inherently evil, that's just part of who we are. And if Visas gave up on everything now, what would happen to those who just wanted to keep living their lives in these strange worlds? And so, it was decided. Visas would not pick the path of destruction, but rather would create a world all their own. Harnessing the powers of Reich, Rhino, Rise, and Riem, Visas absorbed these forms into himself to become Visas Amritara, forming the Amritara system of planets, with a world modeled after the ruined Calarium in its center. This world would be a place where all the different factions, Scareclaw, Tearlament, and Kashtira, could live in harmony. And that's currently where we're at, but like I said, not every question has been answered. The first of which being, what in the heck is going on with Vita Carantha? They have a card here, but no representation in any of the Speller Trap cards to show what their involvement even is. The only working theory I have is that Visas recalls that someone split this Star Warrior into multiple emotion clones, so Vita seems like the only candidate for having done this. Or, if not them, someone associated with them. I was initially of the opinion that this was another of the Visas forms, but on top of having an actually unique face and hairstyle, Vita also seems to have the body of the cosmos that Visas has, but Vita's is green as opposed to the purple-blue hue that we're familiar with. So it'll be on future sets to expand on how Vita fits into the whole story. There's also the matter of the two missing planets, and presumably Visas clones. In my last video on the subject, we pointed out a lot of connections between this story and the family of faiths that make up Hinduism, and a prediction I made was that we were in for 2 more worlds, and thus Visas clones. The second, which would have Kurma, and Vraha, the third. And if the story ends the way it does right now, I'd call that a pretty big missed opportunity. Thankfully though, I think we've still got some time left before we have to say goodbye to Visas. The art for pristine Planet Amritara shows 7 heavenly bodies. I'm confident in saying that the collection of them can be called Amritara, though the main world in the center could also be called that, kind of like it's the Planet Amritara in the Amritara system. This leaves 6 surrounding bodies with some familiar colors. Green is probably Reichphobia, red is Wraithsoth, and purple is the new Tearlaments Perlegia, formerly Pearl Reno. This leaves us with the menacing Shadow Planet, which probably would go completely unnoticed without that menacing aura, and 2 grayed out planets, almost devoid of color, and dollars to donuts, one of them is the destroyed Calirium, meaning another of the planets met with a similar destructive fate. So with the information we have left, I can only assume that the Shadow Planet is the realm of another heart that's been taken over by Vita Carantha, and while the clash of Visas and Prime Heart destroyed Calirium, Vita might have been behind the destruction of the other. In fact, I can even tell you which one is which. We've already established that each planet and its heart monsters represent one of the avatars of Vishnu, numbered in a particular order, and the planets themselves are numbered in the OCG names. So, since Peril Reino is the first broken world, we'll start here. Then, we number all of them counterclockwise. By doing this, we get Reichphobia as 4 and Raitsoth as 6, which, as it turns out, lines up with their OCG names. So, assuming that this grayed out world is Calirium, it was the second planet that was destroyed, so goodbye Turtle World, and the surviving one is Vraha, so hello Boars. But what can we expect from this new antagonist? They certainly don't share the same naming convention as the rest of the Visas clones, so what gives? Thankfully, the names are a big giveaway. See, the Vedas are mildly analogous to the Christian and Jewish Bibles or Muslim Quran, but for Hindu faiths, so you can already see the connection here. In fact, it's said that by reciting the Vedas, you're regenerating the cosmos, something that Visas is doing quite a bit of right now with their newfound powers, so maybe all this caught the attention of a higher authority. Notably, the major Vedic tradition and authorities are derived from 4 major books: Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharvaveda, the last of which I feel is represented here, since the name is the closest. Each section focuses on different aspects that are used by many subcategories that are a part of the Hindu family of faiths. Rig means verses, and covers the many teachings and sutras. Yajur refers to sacrifices, and contains information on how to perform religious rites. Sma means chants, containing hymns and invocations. And Atharva contains the knowledge and traditions that would be under the purview of a local priest, and we're likely to see Veda Karantha exercise that authority very soon. Suffice it to say, Visas' journey is not over yet. The 4 Vedas are making themselves known, and I have a feeling they don't like Visas taking their own path in forming this new broken world, and are intent on finding the other hearts, forcing Visas to take on their power, and forcing the formation of another vicious Astrolaud, one even more powerful than the last, to complete the cycle and bring about this universe's version of the Kali Yuga. But I don't think that Visas, along with their newfound partnership with Rulkalos, Unicorn, and Astra, are gonna let things go without a fight. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and it is time. With a new set comes a new wave of lore cards. Last time, we saw our Warrior of the Stars establishing something of a glorious paradise, taking all the best traits of the various worlds they'd visited to live with the survivors of these various ordeals in peace. But a shadow lingered over the proceedings, with a new actor named Veda Karantha being introduced. Though they didn't do anything in the previous set, we speculated that they'd be the next antagonist in the series, being responsible for the destruction of 2 other planets in the system, and with some recent releases, that appears to have been confirmed. So let's take a look at these new cards, see how they change the game, then see what the potential introduction of time travel does to the story. This is the Age of Overlords Visas lore explained. Like with the last set, we didn't necessarily introduce a whole new archetype, but instead we were given a series of support cards for Visas and the Boys, which is my new term for 1500 attack, 2100 defense monsters. So we're gonna lump all these new cards together to get up to speed. First up is Visas Samsara, a level 4 light fairy tuner monster with 1500 attack and 2100 defense, whose name is treated as Visas Starfrost while on the field or in the grave. You can target any number of Visas monsters that are banished on your field and or in your grave, shuffle those Visas monsters into the deck, and if you do, special summon this card from your hand. And if you do that, it gains 400 attack for each monster with different names shuffled by this effect. And if this card you control would be used as synchro material, you can treat it as a non-tuner. Wow, that is a wild bundle of effects. Even just being a tuner or a non-tuner on demand is kinda nutty, and having another heart stat lined and Visas Starfrost in rotation is nice for a variety of reasons. Though don't expect to get a huge stat boost off of the special summoning effect, since we currently only have 3 differently named copies, including this one, and one's from the extra deck, so keep your expectations measured. It makes for great recycling, extending, and enabling all in one convenient package. Heck, you can banish 2 of these from the grave to summon Vicious Astrolaud, then shuffle both back into the deck with a 3rd copy, because while you only get a boost for every differently named monster you shuffle back, you can target as many of them as you want for the summon effect. But I hate it because now I want to cosplay this monster too! And it's going to be a lot more difficult than the Albaz one. Vita Upanishad is a level 12 Dark Warrior Pendulum monster with 0 attack and 4000 defense with a scale of 0, and it can't be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned by its pendulum effect, and you can only special summon copies of this card once per turn. As a pendulum spell, once per chain, if any number of monsters are destroyed, place 3 counters on this card. This card's pendulum scale is increased by the number of counters on it, and you can remove 12 counters from this card to special summon it. As a monster, once per turn, if your opponent special summons any number of monsters from the extra deck, except during the damage step, you can banish 12 cards from your hand, field, and/or grave face down, and it becomes the end phase of this turn. And once per turn, during the standby phase, return this card to the hand, then you can special summon one of your Vita monsters that is banished or in your hand, deck, or graveyard. This is odd. So it has a bit of a charge time, becomes a huge blocker on board, and essentially keeps your opponent from summoning anything out of the extra deck, but only for a single turn, because then you have to do the whole process all over again. Thankfully, you're not left with nothing, replacing itself with its other form, Vita Karantha, which isn't half bad, but isn't exactly the kind of payoff I was hoping for. Though with the focus on destruction across these cards, it might actually end up being Manadium support? That being said, the flavor is immaculate. Technically, despite needing 12 counters, you get that in 4 activations. So why in the heck did they make that so complicated? That's a bit too soon. We'll be covering that later on in the lore section. But once you find out, it'd be really funny if you came back here and listened to it again. That way you can do a bit of a little time warp again yourself. Manadium Explained is a level 6 Light Fairy Synchro tuner monster with 2300 attack and 1300 defense, requiring generic material. If this card is synchro summoned, you can target a level 2 tuner monster in your grave and special summon it, but its effects are negated. You can target any number of tuners you control, and their level becomes 2. Also, you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn, except synchro monsters. Oh, come on, you don't want me to start spamming sprite cards? Does the Tearlament rivalry still run that deep? Oh well, either way, this card is awesome. While it's not going to get you into Excel Synchro Stardust Dragon by itself, since Explained is itself a tuner, it's a helpful bridge to get you into Prime Heart easily, and can even help you lower your levels so you can cram as many of those little things into it as possible to get as many attacks as possible. But raw help us if they ever make a level 2 tuner that can be treated as a non-tuner. That format is going to be rough. Planetary Elegy is a normal spell card that adds a Vita monster from your deck to your hand. If any number of face-up tuners you control are destroyed by battle or card effect while this card is in your grave and Visa's Starfrost is on the field, you can banish this card, then target one of those destroyed monsters and add it to your hand. See, this really is roundabout Manadium support. This actually makes base Vita Karantha very playable in the deck, because you can use this to get it into your hand, and then when you use Visa's Starfrost to pop your Manadium, you get to summon the Karantha and trigger the recursion from Elegy. It also confirms that Vita is going around on a planet-destroying kick, which I find to be very satisfying. For my own successful theorizing, I don't think the inhabitants are going to feel the same way about it. Planetary Eulogy is a quick play spell card that targets a monster you control and an effect monster your opponent controls. Destroy that monster you control, and if you do, negate that opponent's monster's effects until the end of this turn. Then, if Visa's Starfrost is on the field, you can destroy the targeted monster. During your main phase, if a Vita monster card is on the field, you can banish this card from your grave to destroy a monster you control. This is kinda bonkers because the initial effect can be used with any deck. So as long as you don't mind losing a monster, or are looking to do so, this is some pretty cool effect negation that can even help you dodge targeted interaction. The grave effect is strange, but once again, does have Manadium synergy, and does trigger both of Vita's effects. And note that it looks for a Vita monster card, not just a Vita monster, so you can use this even if Upanishad is in the scales. People may think Manadium is on its last legs, but I think these new cards have a chance to breathe some new life into the theme, so don't break out the eulogy quite yet. Loka Samsara is a normal trap card that banishes a face-up Visa's Starfrost in your monster zone until the end phase to special summon a heart monster with 3000 attack from your extra deck, ignoring summoning conditions, but it can only activate its effects once, also banish it face down during the end phase. If your opponent special summons any number of monsters from the extra deck while this card is in your grave, except during the damage step, you can add this card to your hand. So this sounds incredible, but there are quite a few caveats to it. Currently, there are only 4 targets, and they vary widely wildly in usability. Tryheart will put all of your opponent's monsters in defense position, and if we're on Scareclaw, does give us some sweet advantage. Kaleido Heart is basically just going to shuffle a card on the field back into the deck, which is fine because you wouldn't be able to use the self-revival effect in this context anyway. Arise Heart is basically only going to be a Macrocosmos because it won't have the material to detach for its banish effect, and while its mandatory one will help attach one material, that'll use up its one activation per turn. And Prime Heart, well, wouldn't exactly be prime. That being said, having a mini toolbox ain't too shabby, and as the Vsauce decks continue to expand and overlap, this card is poised to be a sleeper hit. But Vita, my good bitch, you have to rein it in. Not even Twitter is as thirsty as you are when it comes to Visas, come on! Sarv Sarga is a normal trap card that you can activate if Visas Starfrost is on the field. Target an effect monster on the field, shuffle that target into the deck, and if you do, during the end phase of this turn, its owner can add a monster from their deck to their hand with a different type and a lower level than the shuffled monster's level, rank, or link rating. And if any number of Vita monsters are special summoned while this card is in the grave, except during the damage step, you can add this card to your hand. This is also pretty wild because on the one hand, it is removal, but gives your opponent a chance to grab the monster they need on the crackback. Alternatively, you can shuffle back your own monsters and then give yourself a search. In fact, it forms a bit of a combo with Locust Samsara, because you can get all that value out of Kaleido Heart when you summon it, shuffle it back with Sarv Sarga to maintain it, then during the end phase grab any level 8 or lower non-fiend monster from your deck to your hand during that end phase. Which in most cases boils down to you adding any monster in the game to your hand, including hand traps. My apologies to any Dark Necrofear decks out there. And now that heart monster isn't getting banished, you can recycle Loka and Sarv and do it all over again. It's almost like there's this big motif over the past few cards that involves cycles. So that's all the new cards, but what do we do with them? Well, I've already stated it a few times before, but Manadium seems to be the deck the new cards are focused on. It's not uncommon to destroy a number of your own cards in that deck, giving you easy access to Pendulum Vita. And if you have 2 copies of that card, you can pull off a funky maneuver where you activate one, accumulate a bunch of counters, then activate the other once you're all done to give you some fantastic scales, at which point you could conceivably summon the one with counters, thus resetting it, while the other starts the process of gaining more counters. Though since most of the Manadium cards are level 2, you won't have to wait very long to get enough counters to pendulum summon them all. We also can't forget that Visas Samsara is a fairy monster, bringing it in line with the Manadiums, and is basically more copies of Heart that also helps to enable it. All in all, we have some great new tools for the theme that essentially give you negation, removal, battle tricks, and even a Macrocosmos. So if we see enough hits on the dominant decks, I wouldn't be surprised if these cards started sneaking in for some premier wins. Though if Arise Heart gets banned, it does throw a bit of a wrench into those plans. Okay, now that we've covered the cards and their place in the game, now it's time for the fun part. Let's talk about the lore. But like last time, we don't have much to talk about, but we do get a few of our questions answered. Vita is confirmed to be the new antagonist, and they do have the ability to, at the very least, ruin planets as seen in Planetary Elegy, but we aren't made aware of what happens to Astro, Unicorn, or even Kitkalos. We could possibly see Manadium versions of those monsters, since Kitkalos took on the mantle of Trelock Shukta, but they could have just as easily been consumed in the planet-destroying cataclysm. Though I have to say, the inclusion of the words Elegy and Eulogy do a great job of reinforcing the idea that these planets are finished, and may hint at the name of a new planetary archetype, perhaps? But the most striking image of these new cards is the one for Sarv Sarga, showing Visas losing their Amritara gear, being pushed into a portal that leads to the Clear New World, the old spell card that was retroactively introduced as part of the world's canon, kind of like how the first Snake Eye card was for its story. And by itself, it would read as some kind of dimensional banishing, but note the giant clock faces. This implies some kind of time travel going on, and while nothing here particularly denotes if it's moving forward or backward, the mythology the Visas story draws from does focus on one big cosmic cycle, so I think it's safe to say that Visas is being sent back in time. As for the one who did that to Visas, let's take a look back at Vita Upanishad real quick, because it's probably the biggest flavor win in the whole cycle. I brought up that the counter effect is far more complicated than it needed to be previously, and while part of it is to allow for a functional pendulum scale to happen this century, the lore reason is that it's another reflection of what's called a Mahayuga, or greater cycle of the ages. It's made up of 4 internal smaller yugas known as Krita, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali, parallels of a golden, silver, Bronze, and Dark Age. And each of those yugas are divided into 3 more smaller ones: the Dawn, the Day, and the Dusk. So if we multiply the 4 yugas by their 3 sections, you get 12. So each instance of destruction Upanishad witnesses is the passing of another world age, until the cycle has been completed, ushering Vita's arrival. Now, I'm inclined to say that, with the effect to skip your opponent's turn, this means Vita launches us into the future, because we're bypassing our opponent's turn entirely, but given the circumstances, it is probably meant to be seen as going back to your last turn, especially since this card reverts into its past form, Vita Kurantha. Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring attention to the name. The Upanishads are a series of texts that mark a transition of Hindu philosophy from its primary focus on Vedic tradition into that of Vedanta, which expounds upon them and forms new schools of thought. Which honestly seems a little hypocritical. What, Vita gets to freestyle, but the rest of us have to keep going with what we've got? That's rude. I think our karma's a little better than that. Speaking of Trilakshukta, I couldn't find anything when looking for the name alone, but I did get a lot of results for Trishula, which you might know as the most powerful ice barrier dragon, but it turns out that those 3 were named after legendary weapons. And it just so happens that the Trishula is a divine trident used by Shiva. So if we get the Manadium versions of Astra and Unicorn, their names could similarly be influenced by those weapons. Now, another term you might have picked up on is Samsara. It's a concept you might have brushed up against if you've played Yu-Gi-Oh for a bit. Samsara is a cycle of rebirth, with your destination in the cycle being determined by your karma. Visa's Samsara does a good job of establishing this by shuffling away all your Visas monsters in rotation, effectively setting you back to square one. But what about the trap card Loka Samsara? Well, Lokas are planes of existence. They can represent worlds, dimensions, universes, that sort of thing. So Loka Samsara would roughly translate to rebirth of the universe. And with Vita at the center of it, it's not good news for any of us. And I've got to say, it's even more worrying that Vita isn't looking at all these images with a smug grin like in the rest of his cards. He's not satisfied with how things are going. He actually looks pretty pissed off. So what can we predict will happen next? Well, notably, Visas may have lost their Amritara powers, but they haven't changed to their warrior form. They've maintained their fairy typing and the stat line of their heart counterparts. So I don't think we've seen the point where the time loop necessarily joins where we started the journey. What's interesting is that we can see a heavenly body behind Visas and possibly another at the top right, and they look remarkably like the world's Reichphobia and Pearl Reno. And since the big giant orb of Reichphobia isn't being assaulted by the Kashtira Death Star, it adds more credence to the fact that Visas was sent back in time. In fact, I'm fairly certain that, out of the remaining worlds, Visas has been sent to the second because this place doesn't seem to have a giant dark orb around it. This gives Visas the chance to visit these worlds before they were ever taken over, and in an attempt to preserve the timeline, takes the hearts away, either to a safe location or absorbs them before Vita can destroy them, before finally confronting the villain at a point in time after base Visas gets thrown back in time. The question remains though, did Vita make a mistake sending Visas back to a point where he could change fate? Potentially save all of his new friends? Or is this a bid to get Visas to absorb the rest of the hearts, to bring about a force even stronger than Vicious Astrolaud? One powerful enough to destroy the universe and reset this cycle. Only time and the next core set will tell. And that's all I have to say about the new Visas lore. While we didn't advance very much, the door has been opened for some pretty interesting plot beats, and I can't wait to see where things go from here. Will Visas be able to save the other hearts before it's too late, or will history sadly repeat itself? Make sure to hit that sub button to stay on top of all the latest lore speculation, hit the like button if you liked it, and share this video around with someone you think will like it. I'd love to hear what y'all think and what theories you have of the story moving forward.